How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Since we're recording, I would like to go ahead and say up front, for the record, since this was a discussion last time, Superman 1 and 2 did shoot back to back.
They did.
They were filming at the same time, and there was a whole thing around that. Now, what happened was, it was supposed to go from March 1977 to October 1978, but then there was this whole thing where Richard Donner and the studio was having a huge problem, and production got halted about 75% of the way through. Then they waited till December when the first one came out, fired Richard Donner, and then picked back up the next year with the rest of it.
Well, I think on that last episode we were like, I don't think so, but I'm not sure. But thank you for clarifying. Now we don't have to do an episode on Superman 1 and 2. So it's done. You did it, Gary.
Well, I only share that story for it being like one of the few times I'm right.
Oh, yeah.
And also, Richard Donner had problems with the studio.
He did,
and
yeah.
That has never happened in the history of Hollywood.
Nobody. No director has ever had studio interference that severely limited their creative vision. Definitely, that has never happened before.
And with that,
studio interference.
Why are you talking that
what?
way?
What?
and with that, well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the guys telling you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
Hey, I'm your other host, Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you for joining us for this episode in our series covering the career of filmmaker David Fincher, titled David Fincher, Rules of the Game.
Yes, I can't wait to talk about. We should have named this Fincher, a hardly knower.
I thought
Nice,
of that
that's
joke
solid.
earlier. I was saving it for a perfect moment.
Oh, I am sorry.
Ruined it.
I'm sorry I ruined that for you, Gary. I can't wait to talk about Alien Cubed today. It's going to be a good discussion.
Please only refer to it as Alien Cube.
I can't wait to find out what the rules of the game are.
Oh, you'll find out.
If you roll doubles, you go again.
That's what I've heard.
So in our first episode of this series, we spent a lot of time talking about the years that Alien 3 spent in development hell before David Fincher ever came on board. And the reason I wanted to do that was because, for one thing, some of the proposed versions of Alien 3 that we could have seen were sort of insane. And I personally I love stories about movies that never were. Like, I remember getting a book a few years ago from the library that was just, I think it was called Never Coming to a Theater Near You or something like that. And it was just all stories about versions of movies that never happened, and that's just fascinating to me. It's a fascinating part of the development process. But also,
I think there's been podcasts started with that premise.
Oh yeah, there's a really well-known one that I can't, not well-known enough for me to remember the fucking name of it right now. There's a podcast out there that's much more popular than our podcast, whose entire premise is talking about unmade versions of movies. It might be the Never Coming to a Theater Near You or something along those lines, But yeah, Tales from Development Hell is a really cool book. I don't know. That stuff's just fascinating to me because it's almost like you're getting these glimpses of an alternate history of what we could have had if things had gone in a different direction. I think that's really cool. So that's one reason we wanted to kind of talk about that stuff because, it's kind of cool learning about the development process through that specific, vision. But also going through all that information really shows you how high the stakes were for this movie. 20th Century Fox and Brandywine were taking this production very seriously. They had a lot of money involved, not to mention the potential for future entries in a lucrative franchise. And that's the intense environment that David Fincher was brought into as a 27-year-old first-time director, which, as you'll discover, led to him having, let's say, a contentious experience while making this film. And so now we will continue the story of the making of David Fincher's Alien 3. Or Alien Cubed.
This is Rumor Control. Here are the facts. A 337 model EEV crash landed here on the morning what? There was one survivor, 2 dead, and a droid that was hopelessly smashed beyond repair. The survivor is a woman.
When they first heard about this thing, it was crew expendable. The next time they sent in Marines, they were expendable too. What makes you think they're gonna care about a bunch of lifers who found God at the ass end of space? Might kill you just for having seen it.
Ripley.
Because they won't kill it.
We give you thanks, O Lord. Wrath is come, the time is near for us to be judged. The apocalypse is upon us. Let us be ready. Let your mercy be just.
This is Spoiler Control. Here are the facts. This episode, we'll be discussing Alien 3. If you haven't seen it, or at the very least, listen to our episodes covering Ridley Scott's Alien and or Jimmy Cameron's Aliens, it would be wise to do so before proceeding. Thank you, gentlemen.
I love that's like your Brian Glover impression. It started off strong, turned into Dan Aykroyd from Coneheads there towards the end, I think.
I'll take it.
I do try to, during this episode, I'm predicting the future, I guess. I did try to find as many Fincher quotes as I could, on a lot of these things, because you gotta scrounge around to kind of find them. He doesn't talk about this movie a lot and wouldn't do the commentary, none of that stuff. Luckily, though, I will say, just to give him credit, there was a WordPress blog, for Alien series, and they collected quite a few moments where he'll briefly discuss the movie and other interviews and stuff like that. But I found this one from 2011 that I liked, and I thought it was a good opening tag that might intrigue you to go further. He says, quote, "I wanted to do an Alien movie. I've wanted to do one since I was 16 years old. I felt like I had a relationship to the Dan O'Bannon side of it, as well as the Walter Hill side of it, as well as the H.R. Giger side of it. I felt like I kind of knew what I would do with that. And the fact that I wasn't allowed to was my own fault. But that was a world that I loved and I couldn't get enough of. So it was an easy thing to want to get involved with it, and probably too easy, because it was totally fucked up for so many different reasons."
That is a great introduction to what we're about to talk about. David Fincher is he's not a big interview guy in general. It seems, at least early on in his career, he didn't seem to be. Although there is a really great book, as part of that Interviews with Filmmakers series, which we've used the David Cronenberg one, we've used the John Waters one as sources here on the show before. And I got the David Fincher one. It only goes up through 2011, so nothing in the last decade and plus, is in there. But there are a couple, I think the first 2 interviews, he talks a little more heavily about Alien 3, and that's kind of it. Like everything, there are references here and there throughout the other interviews over the years, but he doesn't like to talk about this experience, and you'll find out why if you don't already know. So by the time David Fincher enters this whole Alien 3 story, the film had spent nearly 5 years in development hell, has had 2 different directors attached prior to him, and no less than 10 screenwriters taking a stab at its script at a cost of about $13 million. And yet, when filming began in London in January of 1991, it did so without a completed script, which, as you can imagine, did nothing to help an already troubled production. And you'd think that with all of these screenwriters that had been involved, they'd have some sort of script to work with, right? Like they've been working on a script for years, but the producers still didn't seem to really know exactly what they wanted. Now, once Fincher was on board, though, he did bring his own ideas to the table, but I think his ideas may have been just a little too out there for the brass at Fox. The story that Fincher told them, this is the story that, according to him, the story that got him the job. This is, in Fincher's words, this is from one of those interviews, actually, that from that book that I just mentioned. But he says that his idea, the story he wanted to tell was, quote, a fucking David Lean movie. It wasn't about tough guys in outer space. It was about pedophiles in outer space. It was a huge movie, and it was very complicated and political. There were 3 Lance Henriksen's running around. Paul McGann was a serial killer, and at the end of the movie, you had an alien running around, and you've got 3,000 stormtroopers on their way. It was massive and strange, and the idea of it was great. By the way, most of the time when we quote David Fincher, he will say fuck at some point during the quote. It's just his favorite word, it seems like, which I can relate to.
Totally get it. Fucking get it.
Yeah, it's great. It's got a lot of uses, that word, and David Fincher utilizes all of them pretty regularly.
It's just sad that we'll never get to hear him say that on like Inside the Actor's Studio or anything like that.
Yeah, well, he's not an actor.
Because the question. Well, they've had directors and writers on there too, but like James Lipton will never ask him the question.
Yeah, well, not,
and we'll never get to find out if it truly is his favorite word.
Yeah, until I don't know, they meet one day in hell or heaven.
What is going on here?
James Lipton's dead is what we were getting at there. James, he is passed.
But yeah, you're just like making a lot of assumptions that they're going to still do Inside the Actor's Studio.
Oh, James Lipton, he's interviewing long dead actors in the afterlife now, How cool would it be if that's your job and then all of a sudden you get to have it sit down with Humphrey Bogart, Why wouldn't he do it? Assuming the afterlife is real, that is.
So that brings into question, like, maybe James Lipton's heaven is all these other actors' hell of having to sit for a massive interview with James Lipton.
Like, I thought we got out of this. Well, anyway, David Fincher, as we've noted, was a huge fan of Ridley Scott, and he was a huge fan of the original Alien, so he held the property in high esteem, and because of that, he felt the need to turn the third entry into kind of an epic, or as he put it, he basically was turning it into Apocalypse Now in his head. Fox, of course, they heard his pitch, and they're like, this is great, you got the job, but we're not paying for all that. Fincher estimates, and he might be speaking in hyperbole here, but Fincher estimates that it would have been a 3-hour, $150 million movie. So he kind of understood why they would hesitate to greenlight that. But instead of finding a compromise at a certain point, he says they, quote, cut the fucking balls off the thing.
He really has a way with words, doesn't he?
Does. He really does. He's a wordsmith. I guess they admired his ambition because this idea, like I said, it secured the job for him, which in and of itself is unprecedented. I mean, Fox was giving a first-time 27-year-old director a $50 million budget, which was higher than any in the franchise so far. I mean, James Cameron's movie was about $18 million. So they're giving him $50 million to craft a sequel to one of their most popular franchises.
There's a on-set article in Premiere Magazine, May of '92, where they have some great insight on production, and they kind of discuss that themselves. They kind of talk about how many 27-year-olds have ever had that kind of opportunity put in front of them. They have a quote from an unnamed friend of Fincher on set. He says, he was right out of the Naval Academy school and they put him at the helm of the Titanic.
That's a great analogy, honestly. So after Fincher was brought on, Fox hired a screenwriter named Larry Ferguson to do a 4-week emergency rewrite on the script at a cost of $500,000. So they hire Larry Ferguson, pay him $500,000 to rewrite a script that's already, as we said, has already been rewritten a dozen times at this point. Ferguson had also contributed to rewrites for Beverly Hills Cop 2. So this was just a couple years prior, so he kind of knew a thing or two about studio expectations for a sequel. Well, Sigourney Weaver hated Ferguson's script. This is one, we actually referenced it in our last episode. This is the one that she described Ripley as being written to sound like a pissed off gym teacher. And there were other issues with this rewrite as well, not the least of which being that it sounds, in my opinion, really fucking stupid. As Fincher describes it, in Ferguson's draft, Ripley was going to quote, be this woman who had fallen from the stars. In the end, she dies, and there are 7 monks left, 7 dwarfs. And then at the end, they put her in a tube, and we're waiting for Prince Charming to come wake her. So, the studio passed on that ending, as you can imagine.
Yeah, and apparently first in that same script, she's like Wendy from Peter Pan. Fincher in one interview talked about like she sits there and tells all of them all these stories and stuff like that.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb. And he said, like, you can imagine what Joe Roth said when he heard this. He's like, what the fuck are they doing over there? What is going on? And
you hired the guy, right?
Yeah. And the monk one too, I'm surprised we never mentioned this, but I was breezing through that script because I didn't get a chance to before our last episode to like really look at it. And we never talked about too that the ending of that script is so weird because it's like she gets on the ship and the planet or the satellite or whatever is burning.
This is the Vincent Ward version, the Vincent Ward script with the wooden planet, the wooden monastery.
Yeah, sorry, the Vincent Ward script. That's what I'm thinking of.
Which was the one that fell apart right before Fincher came on.
Right. So anyway, I don't know why I'm telling this story, but now that we're here. So she's getting on the ship and she has the alien inside of her, but one of the monks is looking through this old book that they have of stuff and he sees like some kind of image about taking the devil out and putting the devil inside yourself or something, sacrificing. So basically, anyway, he makes some kind of herbal tea and she's about to, have the thing happen. She's on the ship and he makes her drink this tea and she's like, what are you doing? Like it literally describes it as he starts pummeling her midsection. So like he's like, basically he's like punching her in the guts or something.
Trying to kill the alien inside of her.
Well, the alien goes up. And he starts pushing the alien up. It gets stuck in her esophagus. And then he has to like give her mouth to mouth. And basically it finally sucks out and the alien comes out of her mouth and flies into his mouth. And he takes the alien.
It's like,
and
the,
then he
like the end of The Exorcist.
Yeah. And then he walks into the fire.
It is the end. It's the end of The Exorcist.
That is true. That's a good point. Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
Anyway, the monk punches Ripley in the stomach, sucks the alien out her mouth, and kills himself.
I wish they'd have gone with that. Because can you imagine what further sequels? Where do you go from there at this point? Like, what are you doing?
Let's be honest, fellas. Once you get it out of her mouth, you have to have a sequel where you get it out of her butt.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, she poops out an alien.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
She poops out an alien.
Yeah, I don't know what that's called, but this one is the monk snowballs Sigourney Weaver. So weird.
Yeah.
But
So
anyway,
that version.
Been.
What could have been? That version never happened, and then that's why they hired Larry Ferguson. But then his script sucked too. And like I said, Sigourney Weaver hated his script. In fact, she disliked it so much that after reading his draft, Weaver told Fox, "If you're going to do this, you're going to have to do it without me." At which point, Fox coughed up another $600,000, roughly, so that Hill and Geiler could come in and do their own emergency rewrite on it. Because remember, Weaver wants them to write the final draft anyway, because she thinks that them and James Cameron are the only people who have really written Ripley as, a proper character. And it was during their rewrite that the whole wooden planet idea from that Vincent Ward draft was scrapped completely, and the action was moved back to the prison that was introduced in David Tuohy's draft. But since Fincher and Weaver both kind of liked the religious element from the Ward draft, Hill and Geiler turned the prisoners into what Geiler called your basic militant Christian fundamentalist millenarian apocalyptic types, which is actually a line that he put into the script. I think the doctor says it. And they had this first draft in about 3 weeks. And hey, guess what? Everyone liked it. Well, not everyone, but the studio liked it. And Sigourney Weaver liked it. And then David Fincher, of course, he had some reservations.
Well, hopefully one of them was that not one person ever figured out how the fucking alien egg got on the ship at the beginning of the thing, because it makes no sense from aliens. But anyway.
Is there an egg?
Well, there had to be for the face hugger to come out, right?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah, there's a quick shot of an egg like attached, like up in the corner somewhere.
Is there?
And
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's during the opening credits.
Because I just sort of assumed that the alien, the face hugger had come out of an egg somewhere before the Sulaco left and just, crawled crawled onto it because
Yeah,
it's got little legs. Yeah, and just hung out.
But if Todd's right and there is an egg on there, then that's going to be the issue.
Yeah, of course.
I should probably clarify that's in the director's cut.
Okay, well,
Or
the assembly cut, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, anyway, my real point here was going to be that, Fincher, one thing I do love about him too, he's not afraid. I mean, for a 27-year-old, this has got to be like in a really intense situation, but he's not afraid to say what he thinks. And I was thinking about this. Yeah, I was like, where does that come from? But I was looking like at some of the past stuff, and we talked about it in the last episode that, he had propaganda video or whatever. And I mean, they were bringing in like $50 million a year. So he's not like some slouch, he's not like some newbie kid. And so he should have some confidence. I think in one interview I saw where he met with, it was Sid Ganis, who was like the president of Paramount at first. It was like one of his first meetings about doing a movie. And Fincher said he had pitched him like something that it was like a really complex story or something. He said that Sid Ganis had like looked at his idea and was just like, Fincher, nobody is going to give you $40 million for a first time picture. And Fincher said he told him, Sid, I know that. What am I going to do with a 40-minute movie?
The dude, who Fincher really kind of personality wise really kind of reminds me of especially in his confidence in his abilities, and also the fact that like it's not like misplaced confidence, like he knows that he's talented, knows that he's smart. James Cameron, like he reminds me a lot of James Cameron in his personality.
I could see that.
And so they do this rewrite, and then the start date ends up getting pushed back. It got pushed back from an original scheduled date in late 1990, gets pushed to midway through January 1991. So for the next couple of months during that time, Hill, Giler, Fincher, and the studio fought over the script, the budgets, and the sets, and they're doing this all while more sets are still being constructed.
He literally, there was a quote from him in one interview I read where he was like, there were people I bumped up against on the set during the production of this thing, where he said, they literally told me, quote, listen, we could just have somebody piss up against a wall for 2 hours, call it Alien, and it'll make $30 million at least. He was like, so that's what I'm dealing with here.
Yeah, at one point, one of the guys from Fox, I don't think it was John Landau, but one of the other like higher ups at Fox said, we could release a 15-minute video that's just a black screen and call it Alien 3, and it'll have a $15 million opening weekend. Like, that's another thing that he was told. So that's what he's up against. So Hill and Giler, they wrote and rewrote, and as they did so, Fox's senior vice president, John Landau, he got involved and he began vetting individual scenes for budgetary correctness, a process that Hill later called a very unrealistic way of making a movie. And he added that, usually you get a script and then you find out how much it's going to cost. Then if that's not an acceptable figure, you decide what you don't need quite so much. But what Landau was doing was he was giving them arbitrary guidelines before they even had the creative side of the process done, which is never going to have good results. You can make the cuts afterwards, but let's get all the ideas out on paper first, and then we can start reeling things back, because otherwise you're kind of cutting the feet off of the creative process. So in the middle of all of the battles, there was a poor schmuck named Tom Zinnemann. Tom Zinnemann was a line producer. He had been handpicked by Hill and Giler to help run the production. Now, for those who are unaware of what a line producer does, they are responsible for hiring the film's crew, allocating the money, and making sure that filming is done safely, on time, and on budget. So they're kind of like almost the middleman between the studio, the money people, and the creative side of things, the director. They are one of the most important people behind the scenes on a film. They don't get nearly enough credit because they have an incredibly stressful job because, you've got $60 million and you're the one who's deciding where that $60 million goes. Like how much of it goes where. Unfortunately for Zinnemann, he found himself in an odd position of acting as a buffer between Fincher and the men who'd hired him, the producers, Hill and Giler, who were now functioning not only as producers, but as the film's writers. So it was really kind of awkward and weird, kind of an odd situation for him to be in. And he's having to do this, by the way, all while doing the thousands of other daily demands of a line producer and doing so on a production that didn't seem to know where it was going. So Zinnemann goes to the studio and he told them it's going to cost, this much money. It's going to take this long to shoot. I think he told them it would take 93 days to shoot or something like that. And while he was there to serve, Fincher's vision as a director, it was also his job to bring realistic numbers to the studio heads. But unfortunately, the studio didn't like the information that he was bringing to them. So they fired him, thinking that they thought that he wasn't doing his job to get Fincher to compromise the shooting schedule or the budget. But the fact is, like, for the movie they were wanting to shoot, like, he's being realistic. He's saying, it's going to cost this much money and it's going to take this long if we're going to do this movie that you guys are wanting to do. And they didn't like what he had to say, so they fired him, which, so essentially they killed the messenger. And without Zinnemann there, Fincher lost one of his main allies, so he had to fight tooth and nail with the studio about every single budgetary item. Because you see, it wasn't long before Alien 3 that Fox had produced The Abyss and Die Hard 2, both of which were difficult productions that went wildly over budget, and at least in the case of The Abyss, wildly over schedule. I mean, go listen to our episode on The Abyss if you want to see how much of a shit show that whole production was. So Fox was understandably wary about creating a similar situation with this film, and David Fincher and the creatives behind Alien 3, essentially they were paying for Rennie Harlin and James Cameron's sins. Sigourney Weaver in one interview, it might have been in that Premiere Magazine one that you mentioned, Gary, she even says, like, we paid for Die Hard 2 the entire time we made this movie.
Die Hard 2 just fucked up everybody. Ruined a lot of lives.
Yeah, and all we got out of it was Die Hard 2. At least The Abyss is a really good movie. But Die Hard 2 is still Die Hard 2 at the end of the day.
Right.
Well, not long after Zinnemann was fired, Fox cut the shooting schedule down from a planned 93 days, which is, like I said, what Zinnemann had proposed, to just 70 days, and told Fincher that he'd only get 25 special effects shots, which was less than half of what Aliens had. Then there was another last-minute battle to be fought before cameras even began rolling. See, over the Christmas holidays, this is like 1990 or so, 1991, Christmas holidays, Hill and Geiler were planning on taking a 10-day vacation. And Fox kind of took advantage of their absence by hiring another writer, a writer named Rex Pickett, to do one more bit of rewriting on the script. This is without them knowing, by the way, without Hill and Geiler knowing. Fincher knew. Fincher found out, and he, wants to take Rex Pickett out. They could have dinner, and they just kind of talk about how things were going, where the script was, and what issues they needed to fix. So they go out to dinner, and Fincher kind of unloads on them and tells them all the issues that they were having, or all the issues he had with the script, rather. Then Pickett wrote a memo that just sort of tore apart Hill and Geiler's script. And this memo made its way back to Hill and Geiler, who, to no one's surprise, were pretty mad about it. They were furious. According to Hill, the gist of the memo was that they were fools not to recognize the merit of the ideas that the director had. And this pissed off Hill and Geiler, and it pissed them off enough that they left the London set, because they were working there in London because, again, they're not only writers, but they're producers, so they would be normally on set. So they left the London set, and they never returned. I mean, Fox had fired their line producer, hired another writer behind their backs, and then they were being unrealistic about certain economic realities, essentially making their roles as producers meaningless. I mean, because if Fox wasn't going to do anything that they were saying, then what was the point of having them there?
When I was a little kid, I used to look at adults all the time and think, adults are so wise. They've got it together. They have a plan for everything. And now, being an old man, I'm like, that was not true.
No, nobody knows what they're doing.
And you think that about studios and companies, and then the more you read about them, you're like, no, everybody's just making shit up as they go.
And just throwing millions of dollars at it while they do it.
It's really disheartening, I guess.
Well, or encouraging, because it makes me feel better about not knowing what the fuck I'm doing, because I know I'm not alone.
Or it could be discouraging if you have it, if you'd have thought, hey, maybe if I'd have worked really, really hard at becoming a screenwriter, I probably could have just fucked around and fell into it somehow, right? because nobody knows what's going on.
Nobody knows anything. Who said that? Nobody knows anything.
You did right now.
No, that's a famous quote. William Goldman, famous screenwriter. Nobody knows anything. So he is talking about Hollywood. So, hey, I didn't just pull that out of my ass.
All right, fine.
So anyways, so this is all the trouble they're having before the cameras are rolling. And then the shoot began, and things got even worse. So just like James Cameron's Aliens, Alien 3 was primarily shot at Pinewood Studios in England.
Ralph Brown, who plays Francis Aaron in this movie, he keeps, I don't know if you saw this, he keeps an amazing diary. And I wish I was doing this more, actually. Like, I journal, but I should be documenting, because he recalls things in so much detail. He incorporates it, or at least used to, in this WordPress blog called Magic Menagerie. I bring it up here because he has a couple of sections, one of which has been removed now because he was going to use it in a book or something, I guess. But he's like details throughout his production on Alien 3. Anyway, I bring it up here because he says when they first walked into Pinewood, he wrote down this quote he said that he found etched into the wall there. And it says, "The 6 stages of film production, as seen carved into the wall in Pinewood Studio 5 by someone presumably better versed in the industry than I. Number 1, wild enthusiasm. Number 2, disillusionment. Number 3, panic. Number 4, search for the guilty. 5, punish the innocent. 6, reward the non-involved." That was
that's great.
apparently carved into the wall.
That's amazing. I love that. That should be on a t-shirt, honestly, you know.
right.
I love that. That's great. That's great. I was not aware of his journal, so that's very cool. I love stuff like that because I've got a book it's called The Kill Bill Diary, and it's David Carradine's diaries that he was keeping while filming Kill Bill. You know, I've got the Princess Diarist, the Carrie Fisher's diaries that she was keeping during the filming of Star Wars. I don't know. That's just it's a very cool perspective to have, like one person's very personal experience on the making of a film. And it's a really cool way to look at the behind the scenes on a movie.
I had never, I think I've considered it before, but when I was reading through all of his stuff, I was like, he's recalling like specific stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this from the NWA stuff now. I'm like, man, I really should be doing this too, because you're going to forget.
Oh yeah, I've got a terrible
memory.
Yeah.
And you're going to forget all these little details and these little stories, unless it involves something where you got punched in the face or something,
right.
a lot of this is going to go away.
Yeah.
It's just kind of interesting to read back on some of that, how he was feeling about certain things. And I'll talk about some of that in the casting part.
Very cool. So on the first day of the shoot, Sigourney Weaver, this is how they started, okay? Sigourney Weaver had to lie naked on a table covered only with a sheet and wearing a contact lens to make her eye look bloody, which left her practically blind in that eye. So just backing up, Weaver had been a fan of David Fincher since their first meeting at Fox's Studios. She describes the meeting and says that when he showed up to the meeting, he was wearing an anti-fur t-shirt. So she kind of liked that about him and kind of saw in him a kindred spirit. And she'd been in his corner ever since through all this other development hell bullshit. Like she was kind of always on David Fincher's side. But that first day of shooting kind of challenged that relationship a little bit. Because for her very first scene, she's lying there naked on a table, practically blind, and Fincher calls over the bug wrangler and has him pour lice on Weaver's face. Now, to his credit, Fincher had only asked for a few of them to be dropped onto her forehead, but the bug guy proceeded to dump them all over her face. So they're going in her ears, they're going in her mouth and her eyes. Like she is, understandably, when that happened, she went nuts. She was not happy about it. It was not a great way to start the shoot. And those lice, by the way, you see them all throughout the movie. They're not actually lice. They are little cute little baby crickets. But I'm not.
Oh, see, I thought they were little waxworms.
No,
what are they?
Grubs
or something?
Grubs. No, they're little baby crickets. And once you know that and you watch the movie and you can actually tell that they're crickets because of the way they move, But yeah, and I'm not sure that scene ever made it. I even rewatched it after finding out this information. I'm not sure the shot of them on her face is ever in either cut of the movie. I don't remember it, but you definitely see the little lice a lot throughout it. You see it more in the assembly cut, especially with the scene with the dead ox and all that, because they're covering it. But I don't recall a single moment where you see them on like her face. So this first shot that caused her so much trauma, I'm not sure is even in the final movie. But from then on, things started going a little more smoothly, even though the studio didn't finalize the budget until a few days into shooting, and the writers didn't deliver a final script until they'd already been shooting for about 2 weeks. And as the shoot began, they started off shooting the dialogue scenes, wanting to save the action scenes for later, which is not unusual for a movie like this. But after the bug fiasco, the lice fiasco, Fincher did manage to win Weaver back when they shot an autopsy scene for Newt. It's early on in the movie, in the first act. You if you've seen the movie, you know the scene. It's a very emotionally charged scene, and it's one that meant a lot to Weaver, because of that Newt Ripley relationship was very important to her in Aliens, and so this is obviously a continuation of that. And she was really impressed with Fincher's sensitivity and support during the filming of that scene.
Everything seems like it's fine, except like early on in the thing, Ralph Brown tells this story of, well, I'll just quote it from his journal. He says, "There was a terrible accident one day. Sigourney's makeup lady, Linda, was standing in the doorway on set, and It's one of those science fiction doorways with a sliding panel which goes up and down with a swish. It was a wooden contraption with a weighted pulley, and it failed, and it came down suddenly onto her face.
Oh, geez.
Right on her nose.
Oh, jeez.
I wasn't there.
On the makeup girl, not on Sigourney.
On the makeup girl, yeah.
Okay.
And he said, it was a nasty accident, and she was rushed to the hospital.
Lord.
It shook everybody up. We never saw her again. Later, I learned that she didn't want to claim the medical expenses from the company, but having had to have facial reconstruction and various operations,
Wow.
I think she eventually did settle.
Yeah.
Dangerous places, film sets.
Yeah. Jesus Lord. They are. I mean, we don't talk about accidents that on sets that often on the show unless they're really significant. But I mean, when you're on a huge production like this where hundreds of people are working, people are bound to get hurt. I mean, that's why these productions have insurance. It happens a lot, but yeah, that's wild. Poor thing. Well, the production hit another road bump when their original cinematographer had to be let go. And the original cinematographer that had been hired for the movie was one of Fincher's heroes, actually, a guy named Jordan Cronenweth. So Fincher had actually worked with Cronenweth once before on the video for Madonna's Oh Father. We talked a little bit about that video in our last episode. And he also worked with Cronenweth's son, Jeff, on the George Michael Freedom 90 music video. And then the younger Cronenweth, Jeff Cronenweth, would become one of David Fincher's go-to collaborators, working as the DP on 4 additional Fincher feature films later on. But the elder Cronenweth, Jordan, he was already a legend in the field by this time. He had started working on major films dating back to the late 1960s, and most notably, especially for Fincher, he was the cinematographer on Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, for which he won the BAFTA Award for Best Cinematography. As for why Cronenweth was taken off of Alien 3, there are a couple of conflicting reports. According to a profile on Fincher published in Premiere Magazine around the time of Alien's release, I think that's the same one that you read, Gary, Cronenweth, he worked slowly, which the article says was, quote, in part because of a language barrier, according to Fincher, end quote, which to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because Jordan Cronenweth is American, born in Los Angeles, and they were filming in England, which, speaks the same language. So I'm not sure how a language barrier could be an issue, right? According to that profile, Fox began pressuring Fincher to let Cronenweth go, and eventually Fincher was forced to reluctantly fire his hero. Now, the more likely reason for him being let go may have been still related to his slow work pace, but instead of being attributed to an unlikely language barrier, it was probably due to Parkinson's disease, which is a degenerative disorder that he had been diagnosed with nearly a decade prior. At any rate, he was taken off of the film, and then he actually retired not long after.
He actually died in 1996, too, so not long after that. And it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I think he only has one credited movie around this time in like 1993 or so, maybe, and then that was kind of it for him.
Yeah, I was going to say earlier when you were talking about his movies, he also did Peggy Sue Got Married, which is a way better movie than it gets credit for.
That's a great movie. Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, it's when you're Francis Ford Coppola and you've made like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, anything that doesn't reach those levels of greatness, I feel like gets overlooked a lot. But he's got a lot of like really great little smaller movies that were made in between a lot of the big ones, and that's definitely one of them. It's got a great Nicolas Cage performance in it. A really weird Nicolas Cage. I guess not weird for Nicolas Cage, but a weird Nicolas Cage performance.
Yeah, I do like that we're going to see his son pop up a lot more, like Fincher, and have a relationship. Like he seems to have a real respect for that family.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can't remember what all movies. I know he does Fight Club, but I can't remember which other ones. But I'm sure we'll come across that as we continue on this series. So Jordan Cronenweth was replaced by a guy named Alex Thompson, who was a British cinematographer who had been nominated for an Academy Award in 1982 for his work on John Boorman's Excalibur, and who had also worked with Ridley Scott. He'd been the director of photography on Legend in 1985. So this guy had been working since the late 60s as well, about the same time as Cronenweth had. But they didn't quite have the same rapport. Fincher didn't have the same relationship with him because they had not worked together before, like he had with Cronenweth. But he's in better health and he's working faster and everything. And with a new cinematographer on set, things began to move more quickly. That is, until they started to shoot the big action scenes in late February, because the pace that they were keeping was brutal, thanks in no small part to Fox shortening their schedule by nearly a third of the original scheduled shooting time.
This is a fucked up thing for a studio to do, especially when you spend all this time having to work around everything else they've done and plan all this stuff. But And Fincher's a guy, we're going to see this, of course, and I think Todd even mentioned some of the cool things about his shots last episode too, but like, this guy's so precise with what he does, and over, he'll just like keep doing takes of scenes just so they're perfect. Yeah. And so it's like, in a sense, I can get a handle on the studio worrying because they're sinking big time money into this unknown guy at the helm for them. And I don't know. On one hand, it makes sense, and on the other, it seems they're just trying to do everything to churn out a movie and get the money. But I'll throw in another Fincher quote here, and this is from The Guardian in 2009. He says, "This was a baptism by fire. I was very naive. I'd always had this naive idea that everybody wants to make movies as good as they can be, which is stupid. I'd always thought, well, surely you don't want to have a 20th Century Fox logo on a shitty movie." And they were just like, I don't know, as long as it opens. So I started learning to be a belligerent asshole, which was really, you have to get what you need to get out of it. Yeah. You have to fight for the things you believe in, and you have to be smart about how you position it so that you don't just become white noise. On that movie, I was the guy who was constantly the voice of, we have to do this better. We need to do this. This does not make sense. And pretty soon, it was like in Peanuts to these people. Wop, 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 wop. They'd go, he's doing it again. He's frothing at the mouth. He seems so passionate, but okay. They didn't care.
They didn't care. Yeah, he talks in one interview about how he's like, look, as the director, my name's on the movie. You know, nobody gives a shit about 20th Century Fox. They're like, this is a David Fincher movie. He's like, it's on the DVD. It's at the beginning of the movie. He's like, the movie becomes an albatross that you have to wear around your neck, and you'll always be associated with it. So I want it to be fucking good.
Yeah,
that's the way he sees it. This is his movie. So as a result of this kind of shortened shooting schedule, the filmmakers ended up working 18 hours a day, 6 days a week to try to meet the stop date, a pace that literally put the crew in physical danger due to exhaustion. At one point, an explosive effect backfired and 5 crew members got burned, one of them bad enough that they had to be hospitalized. I mean, days would start at like 7 a.m. and then they'd shoot until 1 a.m. with Fincher supervising 4 units and then spending his nights and Sundays as one day off working on script changes.
One of the articles on set, they talk about like a PA adjusting a scene, and it was like the 10th take into the thing, and like the PA like moves something. He turns around to tell Fincher, okay, I think this is good enough. And Fincher walks over and starts fixing the thing. It's like, this is not a movie we're making for people who watch films one time. This is being made for people who watch the movie 5 times.
Yeah. I honestly, I love that point of view though, because he wants it to be as perfect as possible. And when Fincher, one thing we'll probably talk about a lot throughout this series is I think you briefly mentioned it earlier, but he likes to shoot a lot of takes. He shoots a lot of takes, and but he doesn't do that like some directors have done, where they're really doing it to wear down the actor to try to get some sort of, break them down and get some sort of emotional truth out of them. He's doing it because he wants as many options as possible when he gets into the editing room, and he wants it to be as perfect as possible. So even the minuscule little things, like he wants to get every single thing right. I saw one, I don't think it was a direct quote from him, but maybe one of his collaborators that said like, shoot it all and let God sort it out in the editing room. Which is a pretty great quote. I wish I remember who said it.
Ralph Brown in his diaries was like talking about doing a scene with Sigourney where he's like explaining his plan or something, and he's like, we did like 36 takes of this. He was like, it was always something. He was like, whether Sigourney didn't like something or Fincher would be like, I don't like the way you said this, or he's telling her like, don't question it, don't look suspicious of him, like you look suspicious, like just try this again. And so we did it. He was like, it was like 36 takes. And he was like, and it was so weird because then afterwards I had to go out to LA to shoot ADR. I had never really done this before. And he's like, so I'm learning about this. He's like, I kind of got into it, you're like re-recording your dialogue over the movie and yada, yada, yada. He was like, but I did sit there and think, if I'd have known about this back then, I would have been like, go fuck yourself.
So by this time in the production, Ezra Zwerdlow, who had been brought on as the new line producer, started to realize that Zinnemann had been mostly right about the schedule, and he had to tell Fox that the time that they had given, that 70 days or whatever, just wasn't enough. it wasn't enough time to make the movie that the studio wanted to make, and Fox was not thrilled about that. It's like Fox has their head in the sand during a lot of this. Like, they just don't want to hear this news. Like, hey, we want to make this big epic, $60 million sequel to Aliens and make it bigger and better. But we don't want you to tell us that it's going to take this long and take this much money, right? They almost seem to continuously be in denial about that. So the new line producer tells them basically the same information that the guy that they fired had told them. To make matters worse, the exchange rate had shifted against the dollar. So shooting in London, which had been chosen because it would have been cheaper because of the exchange rates, it suddenly became more expensive than if they had just shot the film in the US, and it was getting more expensive by the day. So Swerdlow and Fincher, they would regularly have to get on the phone together to argue with Fox executives who were thousands of miles away back in Hollywood trying to run this production. And the biggest and longest running fight was over the film's ending. Hill and Giler had continued to consult on the film long distance after Fox offered them more money. They still never came back to London, but they were consulting long distance, and they wanted a clear-cut ending where the good guys win out over the bad guys, like cut and dry, black and white. Fincher wanted something more nuanced. During one particularly heated conference call, Giler asked Fox, "Why are you listening to him? He's a shoe salesman," which was clearly a knock on Fincher's career as the director of commercials, many of which were for Nike, despite the fact that it was Fincher's commercials and music videos that had helped him get the job in the first place.
As holish as that sounds, Fincher does say in stuff that he was there for that, and he backed it up. He was right. What the fuck did I know? But there was a quote from Fincher again from that. I think this was like in the Independent is where I got this one. But he talks about how hellish it was, and he says, "This is the worst thing that ever happened to me, and it would be stupid for me to say that I didn't know what I was getting into. It took me 5 years to decide on a first film, and I always held out for something just like this. The lesson to be learned here is," he says, "you cannot walk into a movie of this size and scope if you don't have a movie like The Terminator or Jaws behind you."
Right.
He said, because he said everybody's wringing their handkerchiefs, sweating, puking blood over how much this is going to cost. He's like, that's when it's nice to be able to say, "I'm the guy who directed the biggest grossing movie of all time. Sit down, shut the fuck up, and feel lucky you've got me."
Right, yeah. I made Jaws, so I know what I'm doing. But he doesn't have that because, this is his first time out. Well, shockingly, a little shockingly, I think, Fox ended up actually siding with Fincher on the ending and went with his proposed ending for the film. And their reasoning behind it, from what I recall, was kind of like, we liked both versions. We liked the Hill and Giler version of the ending. We liked Fincher's version. So they're both good endings. So why don't we go with the guy who's actually there on set and making the movie every day? It just makes logical sense. And that was kind of the last straw for Hill and Giler, who at that point severed all contact with the production. So they went radio silent. They're like, "Fuck you guys, I'm out. Fuck you, you're cool, fuck you." They're gone.
I think I read that, for the most part, it's what Fincher wanted. Like, they did argue with him some on, he didn't actually want the alien to burst out of her chest. Like, he didn't think there was any point in that part. That wasn't, initially something he was into. He wanted it to be more like they're arguing with her, just trust us, come back, and she's debating, and then she's just at peace and lets herself fall.
Well, the alien bursting out of the chest was not even originally shot. That was done during reshoots. A year later, I think.
Oh, okay. So maybe that's what he was.
Yeah. So because originally you just saw a little stigmata of blood on her chest as she fell, like it was just the very beginning of it bursting out. But that whole thing with her fighting with the alien on the way down, that's in the theatrical cut, that was tacked on much later but it is what the studio wanted, which is how it ended up getting tacked on later on. So to make matters worse during all this,
make it worse,
as if things could get worse. They're still filming, and he's battling with the studio suits, and he had to deal with a script that was constantly in flux, even as filming continued. So they're arguing about the ending, but the script itself just kept changing every day. According to Fincher, rewritten pages would arrive via fax from Hill and Giler, I assume, and be expected to be filmed the next day. So they would have sets under construction, even though the scenes that they were being built for were being cut from the shooting script, in real time. It's absolutely insane. And I mean, it was, by all accounts, everyone who is on the set, every cast member who talks about this, talks about it like it was just absolute chaos. Now, before we get too much more into the weeds on the the shoot, the actual shoot of Alien 3. I do want to have a little sidebar here and talk a little bit about the cast. Because aside from Sigourney Weaver, who we've already, talked about a good bit, the majority of the cast here were all newcomers to the franchise because, of course, famously, Newt and Hicks, the survivors from the other survivors from the second movie, are killed off in this one.
Isn't Ripley usually the only person who's not a newcomer to the Alien cast?
Yeah. That's just kind of the thing. But there is the notable exception here of Lance Henriksen, who revises his role of Bishop in a voice role at first, but then as the android's creator in the film's later scenes. And that character, by the way, in some of the tie-in materials is named Michael Bishop Wayland. I don't know if that's canon or not, but that's what he's sometimes referred to as. But the most significant additions to the cast here included Charles S. Dutton as Leonard Dillon, the spiritual leader among the prisoners, and Charles Dance as Jonathan Clemens, the facility's doctor, which is a role that Fincher had originally offered to Richard E. Grant, hoping to reunite him with his With Nell and I co-stars Ralph Brown and Paul McGann, who play Francis Aaron, aka 85, and Walter Gollak, respectively.
Richard E. Grant apparently even screen tested for Alien 3. I guess there was some footage of that he did, and supposedly, according to Ralph Brown, Fincher fought for him, but that was another one of those things, the studio just wasn't feeling it or something, or at least that's what he had heard.
When I think of Richard E. Grant, I think of comedic roles, which honestly, this movie could have used a bit of levity, maybe, so that might not have been a bad decision. But I mean, it's not like Charles Dance was a big star. So I don't know why the studio would want him over. Although I will say this is the only role I can think of where Charles Dance is not a bad guy. Has he ever played a good guy before? He's exceptionally good at playing assholes.
I was going to say nothing comes to mind
because I mean everyone knows him as Tywin Lannister on Game of Thrones, but every other movie I've seen him in. I mean, the first thing I probably ever saw him in was Last Action Hero, where he plays the main villain, really. And so I just always think of him as a villain, and I cannot think of another role where he has played a good guy, like he does here. But he's great in it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember something literally just hit me right now that I was trying to think of. Who plays the fucking guy in Wayne's World 2 that is
Alice Cooper?
No, it's not Alice Cooper.
Ralph Brown.
Is it Ralph Brown?
Yeah, he's the roadie.
Okay,
oh, really?
That's what I'm trying to think of.
Yeah.
4,000 Brown.
I didn't know if anybody else was going to pick that up.
Wait, okay,
but I was like,
all right. That's what
I was.
It just hit me. I was just like, Ralph Brown's the roadie in Wayne's World 2. But
he's the one with the Eminem thing?
Yep. Yeah, the Eminem
No shit. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was like, who the fuck is that? I don't know why that just hit me, but anyway. So,
I
yeah,
had
great.
the same dream.
Ralph Brown is awesome, but he talks about. By the way, I've seen With Nell and I, and I don't know why. I mean, I know why. A friend in college made me watch it with him one time, and that's just not a regular movie like I would have stumbled upon, but he was a huge fan of this movie, and we watched it, and it was funny. It was very British.
Yeah.
I could say that as an American. Apparently, Ralph Brown says that David Fincher was a huge fan.
Yeah.
And that his initial goal was to get literally the whole cast on Alien 3 or something. Yeah. He thinks he was actually one of the reasons it made its way around the Hollywood area was Fincher would try to show it to everybody or something. And anyway, supposedly Charles Dance did try to play the Doctor in the spirit of With Nell.
Oh,
but
that's
nice. Anyway, the cast on this, him and especially, he does talk about really bonding with Dance, I think. Because, you can kind of see that, Sigourney Weaver's going through a lot on this, too.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's seen a lot more of the stress, and she gets a producing credit, right, on this.
Yeah,
So, she's seen a lot more of this bullshit that, Fincher's seen. But the cast did not get along with her from everything I read.
Oh, really?
Not great.
Yeah.
Not super great. Ralph Brown, chalks it up to, he says they've made up since, and then he says that he could, even then, he seems like a very understanding guy. He says he could tell she was stressed about a lot of different things, but that she would have a lot of moments of you're not really going to say it that way, are you? And, is that really how you're going to dress? And and he's he would just he said she seemed very concerned with her image too. And he's and I get it. She's a producer and that if she is dirty and she's all jacked up looking, like she doesn't want to look stupid around everybody else, you know? And so he's like, I would try to tell her, like, be confident in your image. You look great. Like, this is perfect. I don't know. She would have these like little moments of whatever. And he said that literally they were talking one day and he was like, what if we did something? And that she was like, I tried to have you killed off on page 10.
Wow.
And he's like, and she's probably not lying because a lot of people die on page 10.
Yeah.
He's like, but somehow I made it through.
Yeah, I mean Charles Dance, he lasts longer than that, but he dies off much quicker than you would expect that character to.
Anyway, it was just weird. He said he didn't ever feel like he should bother Fincher about it because he said he could tell he was so stressed out about so many other things. And he said that he would talk to people like Postlethwaite or other guys, and they'd be like, "Oh no, she seems fine." He said it was finally like with Charles Dance, I think is who he said that he was finally like, oh yeah, she's doing that to me too. Yeah, he was like, so we were like finally bonded with each other over that. And we've been friends ever since. He was like, and I did feel better. He talks about like later that Fincher even starts pointing it out too, that there was some scene where Fincher pulled him aside. It was like, dude, she's getting to you. She's vampiring these scenes and I can cut around this and I can work with what you did. We got it, but you gotta stand your ground. You gotta be confident.
Yeah.
He's like, if you ever need to walk away, take 5 minutes, get your sitter, whatever. Just say so. He's like, I'm with you. I got your back. And, he's like, so that really helped me out finally that like I wasn't paranoid. And he was like, I just went back to my girlfriend and she cuddled me and made me feel better about everything. And then I'd go back the next day.
Sigourney can't hurt you here. So other members of the cast include Pete Postlethwaite, who appears in a small role as David. You've got Doctor Who alum Danny Webb, who plays the prisoner Robert Morse. Veteran British stage actor Brian Glover portrays the prison warden Harold Andrews. And Holt McElhenney plays Junior, who is the leader of the group of inmates who attempts to rape Ripley. He's the one with the teardrop tattoo under his eye. And he also appears in Fincher's Fight Club. And he's a member of, the Space Monkeys or whatever they're called. And he's also the co-lead, of course, in the Fincher-produced TV series Mindhunter.
That show Mindhunter's dope.
It is. I
It's
sure
really
wish
good.
they would
It's
get another
really, really
season
good.
and wrap it up. It'd be nice.
Yeah. It should also be noted that in addition to Danny Webb, Hai Ching, Phil Davis, Peter Guinness, Clive Mantle, Christopher Fairbank, and Brian Glover all have credits on Doctor Who, with, of course, Paul McGann being the 8th actor to portray the Doctor in the much maligned American-made Doctor Who TV movie back in 1996.
I had no idea that there was a Doctor Who movie produced in America in 1996.
Yeah, it is. Funnily enough, produced by 20th Century Fox.
Is it just like a standalone kind of thing?
It is a standalone. Yeah.
And Paul McGann plays the Doctor.
Yeah, you see Sylvester McCoy regenerate into Paul McGann, but the next time we see the Doctor, it's Christopher Eccleston. And we don't actually see Paul McGann regenerate until there was a short that was done much, much later, but it was actually a BBC thing to kind of tie in.
Yeah.
It was tying in for the 50th anniversary.
Gotcha. So this American Doctor Who movie killed the franchise essentially until they rebooted it. Right.
It was the nail in the coffin until 2006 for sure.
I had no idea.
It's been a little bit since I've watched the Doctor Who stuff, but I kept seeing people on message boards talk about that Alien 3 reminds them of a fucked up Doctor Who episode sometimes. Like just
actually
the way some of the shooting is.
There's also just a lot of British guys.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of British guys, but it's a lot of like, we arrive from space in this weird location with these unique, interesting kind of mishmash of different societal type of people, and we're fighting this thing that's trying to kill everybody.
That's every Alien movie.
It's every Alien movie, and it's pretty much every Doctor Who episode.
Honestly,
well, here's the crossover we're all waiting for.
Yes, yeah.
Exactly. Hey, IDW, if you're listening.
Alien versus Doctor
Heather
Who.
Antos, J.K. Woodward, make this happen, please.
What happens when the alien gets inside the Doctor, then bursts out, which kills the Doctor, but then he regenerates?
Oh, but also, is the alien that's produced by that also able to regenerate?
Oh,
that's
interesting.
Because
if he takes all the characteristics.
And he's taking his DNA and everything, then he would have Doctor Who's regenerative abilities. I think we're onto something, guys.
Here's the thing. Through my podcast, Computer Resume podcast, available now wherever you get your podcast, I've met enough people that I could maybe make this happen.
Let's pitch it. Let's do it. The three of us will write it. You guys are hearing history. Our listeners are hearing history in the making right now. So
the doctor is just fucked up enough that the resolution of this might be he just drops it off on the planet of the Daleks or something.
Right.
It's like, deal with it.
To be honest, that's the crossover I want to see. I want to see Daleks versus Xenomorphs.
Well, that's
that would
that's
be
the
amazing.
sequel. So we got to write the original one, then we can write the sequel to it.
Okay.
And then,
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
And then here's the thing: at the end of in the third act of the Xenomorph versus the Daleks, fucking Predator shows up.
Oh, nice. Okay. All right. I was a bit on the fence. Now I'm in.
All right.
I'd like it better if a Cyberman shows up or whatever.
I was thinking Cyberman. Yes. Because
But-
if you put a
you're like,
Xenomorph
oh,
inside
holy shit.
Cyberman armor.
Maybe, but then like the Cyberman shows up and everybody's like, "Oh, what the fuck? The Cybermen are here!" And then all of a sudden, a big hole gets blown through the Cyberman, like right in the middle, and a Predator standing behind.
Oh,
him.
you just see the three. You just see the three dots of from the Predator's gun on the Cyberman's chest, and then his chest explodes. There you go. Man,
Yeah, there you go.
This is good shit. I hope nobody steals this idea from us.
I know. I'd say we change the podcast right now. For fantasy.
Can we do a
fantasy booking?
Yeah, can we do like an auditory patent pending trademark on this so that nobody steals it? Is that a thing? Todd, you went to law school.
Oh God.
Not copyright law. Anyway, let's move on. We got sidetracked a little bit. So we're talking about the cast. Okay. But one guy we haven't mentioned is Tom Woodruff Jr., who, of course, plays the alien itself, the Xenomorph, Tom Woodruff Jr. And we've actually talked about Woodruff here on the podcast in the past on our episode covering Pumpkinhead, I think is where we first brought him up. That was the directorial debut of Stan Winston. And on that film, Winston, who wanted to focus solely on his directing duties, allowed his core crew of special effects guys to design and create the Pumpkinhead prosthetics, with Winston handpicking Woodruff, who was a longtime member of his effects workshop, to portray the monster. So Winston, of course, as we know, had created the creature effects for James Cameron's Aliens, and he was approached to work on Alien 3, but he wasn't available due to other commitments. Based on the time frame, I'm guessing those commitments were either Batman Returns or, more likely, Jurassic Park. So I think we could all agree that he probably made the right call in passing on Alien 3 if he made either of one of those movies instead. But Winston instead,
that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what you think about Alien 3, Batman Returns and Jurassic Park are better movies than this. I mean, any way you look at it. So instead, he recommended Woodruff and Alec Gillis, who also had worked on Pumpkinhead. He recommended them to work on the creature effects for Alien 3. And Woodruff and Gillis had just founded their own effects company called Amalgamated Dynamics. Amalgamated Dynamics, they got their start working on Tremors. They would later go on to be one of the most successful effects companies in the business, working on all of the subsequent Alien films, as well as several other films that Cinema Shock has covered, including Starship Troopers, Hollow Man, and even Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, where they created that unused animatronic Green Goblin mask that we talked about.
Love that mask.
It's cool. Yeah. Fincher's vision for the Xenomorph in Alien 3 was more of a puma or a beast, is how he kind of described it. Not the upright, more humanoid creature seen in the previous films. And who better to redesign the alien than the man who had been responsible for the original design, which was, of course, Swiss artist H.R. Giger. So they hired Giger to sketch some new ideas for this sleeker version of the Xenomorph, and his revisions included longer, thinner legs, the removal of the pipes around the spine, those like big pipe shapes that kind of jut out the back, and an idea for a sharp alien tongue in place of that kind of iconic secondary set of jaws that we all know.
And also his face was a huge dick.
Well, that was not a revision. It's always been a huge dick. Yeah. So Giger faxed these designs from his studio in Zurich to model maker Cornelius de Vries, who then created a 3D maquette of the newly redesigned creatures. And only one of Giger's new designs actually ended up in the final film. It's the one that they called the Bambi Buster. which is the alien with long, thin legs that walks on all fours that we see. It comes out of either the dog or the ox, depending on which version of the movie you're watching. But I guess like the regular alien that we see throughout is more just based on the original design, not a redesign. But that four-legged alien, kind of trying to portray that on film, did pose some logistical problems. One abandoned idea for how to achieve this, based on a suggestion from Fincher, was to dress a whippet up as an alien for the scenes with where the quadrupedal creature appeared in. But the end result, believe it or not, looked a little bit too silly, so they dropped that idea.
Listen,
But
if
still find
Star
pictures
Trek
of it.
the original series has taught us anything, there's nothing wrong with putting prosthetics on a dog and passing it off as an alien.
Are there actually...
Well, did you try Staples?
Nice pull.
That's good. Did you say there are pictures of that, Gary?
Yeah, I saw a picture online. I'll have to find that.
Man,
again,
that'll be a good
but,
one. That'd be a good one for us to post on like our social media, because I've not seen those pictures, and I would like to see a whippet dressed up as an alien. I would very much like to see that. So another idea that was considered was to animate the alien using stop motion, but the stop motion didn't really allow for smooth enough movement and would limit Fincher on what angles he could use to shoot it. It just wasn't flexible enough. So finally, it was decided that a rod puppet would work best, as it could be filmed on a blue screen and then composited into the live footage with the rods removed via rotoscoping. So using this puppet allowed the alien's movement to appear faster, and they were able to accomplish movements that wouldn't have been feasible by an actor in a suit. They did, however, use the man-in-suit approach when necessary. That's where Tom Woodruff Jr. came in. Just like he had done in Pumpkinhead, Tom Woodruff Jr. was the guy, he not only helped design the suit, but he donned the suit himself. And he was on the soundstage, he was the guy in the alien suit. And that design was a design based on the one used in Aliens, but slightly modified so that he could walk on all fours.
one of the biggest things I always see with like the complaints on this movie, and I honestly, I probably did this myself, was that, people complain about the CG in it in like certain parts, but in a lot of those parts, it's really not that.
There's hardly any CG in this movie. They use CG to remove the puppet rods, and they use CG for that one scene, that one shot of the alien kind of getting a crack on it, That's CG, but the alien itself is a puppet the whole time. It's never CG.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could argue that it doesn't look amazing all the time, but
that's
it's
more
never like
the compositing into the other footage than it is. It's not bad CG because it's not CG,
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So as the shooting continued into May, Fincher passed the targeted stop date for production, and once the production had gone about 10 days over schedule, John Landau, he had had enough. He flew from LA to England, and he took over from Swerdlow and basically he basically worked as a line producer, and began cutting scenes and sequences left and right. He's like, we got to wrap this up, guys. So by this time, they're pretty late in the shoot, and they're already shooting the climactic scenes, because remember, they pushed all the scenes that are heavy on the action to the end of the shoot. So by then now they're shooting all of this stuff. Many of these special effects scenes that, as we were just discussing, involve complex puppetry and animatronics. And David Fincher he was meticulous about getting the shots that he wanted, whether or not an executive from the studio was on set. And Landau quickly found out that although he might be able to push members of the crew around, he could not push David Fincher around. David Fincher would stand his ground.
I found the one interview I was reading with the guys asking him about the situation, and he says, so I heard Landau and you were at each other's throats a lot. And Fincher says, yeah, we had amazing bouts. Screaming, spitting, cat scratching, the whole thing. It's his job to control costs, and it's my job to get the shots. It was a bloodbath, a very constructive bloodbath.
he's being so diplomatic.
So the guy says, did he pound you? And he's like, it's all a random bloody blur. He's like, ask Muhammad Ali, how much do you remember? He's like, I can't really form the words because I'm brain damaged from the whole thing now. And He said, but did he actually try to call cut? And he said, no, he tried to fucking wrap the movie before we even shot certain stuff. And he's like at the end of the day, he called wrap, and he's like, yeah. He'd be like, okay, it's 6 p.m. We need to get out of there. And they were like, so what did you say to him? He's like, I'm like, there's no point in fucking trying to force us to get out of here before it's done. If it's a guy in a rubber suit, it looks like a guy in a fucking rubber suit, and we're all fucked. And he's like, and you'd say that to him? And he's like, yeah, absolutely, constantly. That's one of my most irritating qualities.
The more interviews I read with David Fincher, the more I like him. Because he just, like, is no bullshit, just says what's on his mind. And I love that. It's great. The thing is, John Landau, this is almost like practice for him. Because, like, 5 years after this, he's going to be battling James Cameron on the set of Titanic down in Mexico. This is the same guy, if you go back and listen to our Titanic episode, who was having bouts with James Cameron. Another guy who is going to stand his ground no matter what, you know? So I feel like John Landau's maybe building some calluses here by working with David Fincher, that are going to come in handy when he has to work with James Cameron again in a few years.
That's awesome. This guy, yeah, I mean, he'd be fun to talk to about his famous battles.
Yeah, for real. So according to several members of the cast, what it had seemed like to them from their point of view, and obviously they're not, other than Sigourney Weaver, most of them are not seeing a lot of this like behind the scenes stuff, but they could pick up the vibes on set, you know? So what it seemed like to them was that Fox had hired this young music video director that they thought that they'd be able to control. You know, he was green, he was inexperienced, at least that's how they saw him, but they didn't know David Fincher. They didn't know this like painstaking need for perfection that he had. They didn't know how stubborn he could be. So it seemed that a lot of the friction on the set came from the fact that they couldn't push this kid around and bend him to their will like they thought they'd be able to.
Yeah, but not everybody, like, he had the backing of the casting crew, you know?
Yeah.
Everybody seemed to believe
They respected him.
And believe it. Yeah. And, Shocked to You Drop in 2010, Sigourney Weaver, had an interview about Alien 3, and she said, quote, every day we'd shoot all day, and at midnight, David would even have to get on the phone and defend shooting the next day's work. You shouldn't hire someone like Fincher unless you're going to let them go. So I think it was very difficult for him. Really, it was difficult for everybody. I think the film's really good, though, what he did. It's a very specific vision that Fox wanted him to do. It was not his take on it, which I think made it more complicated for him. And it made a difficult film that much more difficult. But I think Fincher's amazing.
After being on set and looking over Fincher's shoulder for a contentious 2 weeks, and with the film still unfinished, Landau pulled the plug. He shut down the shoot completely. He had all the sets put into storage, and the filmmakers were all ordered to go home. Now, there was some logic behind this. Like, Fox had, after all, already spent tens of millions of dollars on this movie, and they weren't going to just throw all of that away. I mean, who are they? David Zaslav, you know, who is doing that as a pretty common occurrence these days. The head of Fox, Joe Roth, wanted to take a look at the footage, basically. And he wanted to assemble it, see what had been shot, see what was needed to be finished. And the idea was to kind of edit it all together and basically so that they could see exactly what was needed to finish the film, so that when it was time for reshoots, they could get the footage they needed to finish the film in as cost-effective a way as possible. So it is logical at this point. You can see why they're doing it this way. It wasn't like they were shutting it down and saying, we're just going to use the footage we have and we're going to make a movie out of it. They were really doing it to see, all right, what do we got to work with? And what else do we need? What's the bare minimum that we need to get this movie in the movie theaters?
Do you guys want to hear one more fun Ralph Brown story?
I would love to.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll just read it directly from his stuff here. One day, when it was clear again that nothing was going to happen, a group of us decided, for context for that, I should be clear. He talks about nothing was going to happen. He says that they would there was a lot of time of just sitting around because David Fincher would shoot so many things over and over again, or whatever was happening, some kind of confusion. So the guys would just be like, all right, I don't know. He's so they start gambling and playing dice and stuff like that.
Killing time.
Like actual inmates or something. And so he said that they would, they'd hang out. He said, he said it was actually terrible. He's like one of the stories was like, every 45 minutes, the lovely second AD, Marcia Gay, would knock her head in and pop around the door and say, "Gentlemen, you won't be required for the next 45 minutes. Just relax." This actually became alarmingly irritating until one day, Brian swiveled his giant head in her direction and asked, "Is the money the same?" She looked puzzled, and she said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, fuck off then."
That's great.
The story I actually wanted to tell you was he said one of the days that they were busy, they were not busy, and there was clear nothing was going to happen. He said a group of us decided to wander around the studio lot and see what else was going on, like a bunch of escaped prisoners escorted by a correction facility officer. That was me. I can't remember precisely who was in that gang, but I think it was Peter Guinness, Paul Brennan, Clive Mantle, and Danny Webb, and maybe now Buggy and Vincenzo Nicoli too. Anyway, we went into one of the biggest studio buildings. Alien 3 had a majority of them, but there were still some available for hire. There was this giant pyramid structure with lights on and frames around it and people with cloaks wandering around. And we'd asked permission to visit the sets, and they said, okay, whatever. And there was this band called KLF, and they were shooting a video for their single 3 AM Eternal, which had been at #1 in the charts that January. A video, it turned out, for the U.S. market. We watched the take of smoke and lights, bleeps and heavy metal guitar chords, acid house beats and rap, capes and cloaks, and it was all a bit mental, but terribly exciting. They took a break, so we wandered into the next door. And through that heavy connecting door, there was Kylie Minogue, dressed for the video for Shocked. And we all went up to her and became very excited. And we were suddenly aware of this tiny elfin Australian blonde woman. She was being dwarfed by about a half a dozen dirty, shaven-headed prisoners from outer space. She did shake everyone's hand and then gently wandered away and asked one of her people if they could politely ask us to leave. Which we did. Poor love.
Oh, that's great.
Anyway, so there's another little entry there from Ralph Brown's Wonderful Diaries.
I love that. I need to read those. So a few weeks after returning to LA, David Fincher showed this his rough assembly cut to the executives of Fox and to Hill and Geiler, who had once again returned to work on the film during post-production. I think Fox just keeps throwing money at them, so they keep coming back and then getting mad and leaving. But they're back again at this point to help oversee post-production. So after receiving notes from the studio and producers, Fincher spent the better part of the next year in the editing room and made a wish list of scenes that he wanted to film during reshoots, a list that would have added about 6 weeks of filming onto the movie. Fox whittled that down to a mere 8 days with $2.5 million to shoot the necessary footage. So that's all you're getting, David. And those reshoots took place in December of 1991, this time on the 20th Century Fox lot there in Los Angeles, where executives could keep a closer eye on their director.
He said, what am I going to do with 2 minutes of film?
It's a little callback.
Yeah. There you go.
So, among the material shot in Los Angeles were changes to the film's ending. You see, there had been concerns that the ending to Alien 3, where, Ripley sacrifices herself by falling into a vat of molten lead in order to kill the xenomorph once and for all, they thought that might be a little bit too close to the end of another big blockbuster sequel that was about to be released, James Cameron's Terminator 2. Where Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800, of course, sacrifices himself by being lowered into a vat of molten steel in order to defeat Skynet once and for all. So you can see how they could be a little concerned. Now, Terminator 2 wasn't out yet, but they knew what the ending was. Like, the script had gone around town. So they were like, this might be a little too close. Obviously, this late in the game, it wasn't feasible to write and shoot an entirely new ending for Alien 3, especially with the, $2.5 million that they're given. So instead, they shot some additional footage to add to the existing footage, hoping that it was enough to differentiate Alien 3's ending from T2's. And in this new footage, this is what we were talking about earlier, Gary. In this new footage, the alien bursts out of Ripley's chest, and she's fighting with it as she falls into the lead, as opposed to the original ending, which saw her with kind of more serene and at peace with her decision.
There was, I actually found when we took a little pause some of the initial quotes about that I had seen before. He says, the end sequence when Bishop comes and he presents his case, I always wanted it to play like she listens to him. And she's actually really tempted by it. Originally, that scene played out much longer. And there was like a 40-second pause from the time he said, please trust us. And then she finally looked up at him and said, no. It wasn't as quick as it is right now. And I always like that. I like the idea of her making a choice as opposed to having the choice made for her. Mm-hmm. And he goes and he says, there's obviously the part about he said, I don't think it's important to see the monster. If we're going to do this, we're going to have to do something that has a little bit of something else going for it or something. And he said he said at the end, I said, whatever happens in this ending, she has to be in peace at the end. It has to be a sigh rather than gritting teeth and sweat. So we talked about it, went over and over, shot these blue screen elements. We were shooting that shot 4 days before the film even opened. It was a completely ridiculous mess, and I still don't know if it actually works.
Well, I definitely see where Fincher's coming from on that because, one of the films that is often cited as one of his influences on Alien 3 is Carl Theodor Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc, silent film. You can see it in Ripley's hairstyle, which Joan of Arc also has a shaved head in that movie. And, she is a martyr. She sacrifices herself, she doesn't sacrifice herself. She's burned at the stake, but she is killed for her beliefs, essentially, and you can see how if that was indeed an influence on Alien 3, then you could see how he would want this to be like Sigourney Weaver or Ripley is at peace with this decision, just as Joan of Arc was at peace at the end of that movie. So you do kind of understand where he's coming from. And I agree with him. I think it's a better ending, honestly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like his thought process there at least.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's a guy trying to get like his artistic vision in the middle of all the bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, shooting this scene incurred some additional expense aside from the usual stuff you'd expect. I mean, obviously they had to pay the crew to be there. They had to create this little alien for her to fight with and everything. But another weird piece of expenditure that I didn't expect when I found out about it was that Sigourney Weaver had a clause in her contract that said that if she had to shave her head again after principal photography had wrapped, she would receive an automatic $40,000 bonus. And rather than pay that bonus, that $40,000, Fox decided to spend $16,000 on a very complex fake bald cap to cover her hair.
That's an amazing deal. And I wish I could take that same deal. It's almost like one of those people that agrees to get like a logo tattooed on their forehead.
Right.
She just has to. Yeah. She just has to cut her hair though. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's not even permanent.
I did want to mention too that I don't think we talked about it, or if we did, I just completely blanked out and disassociated while it was happening. The most famous scene in this movie was one that David Fincher, by the way, like snuck off and shot. Without anybody knowing. Like, he was supposed to be done, and he got Sigourney Weaver to go with him, and they used the head of a xenomorph as a puppet and shot the film of her, in that hospital scene, head against the wall, and the xenomorph, like, right next to her.
Yeah, yeah.
The really iconic shot. Mm-hmm. And
so iconic, yeah.
Yeah, and they had the guy puppeteering the head, and he couldn't quite get it right. So they had one guy holding the head, another guy doing the tongue thing, and they had to do it like quick. It was like they were supposed to be wrapped, and he grabbed her and was like, we got to get this. And they went. And I still don't think he ever felt like he ever got exactly what he wanted there, but he felt like it was super important. And as it turns out, that's probably like the shot that people most remember.
Well, yeah. Movie. And it also like foreshadows what you find out a few minutes later, that she is carrying, an alien inside of her. And the reason that she isn't killed by that xenomorph is because they know that there's an alien incubating inside of her. So you understand why. And so it really is. It's really a great use of foreshadowing for that, because at first you're like, well, why is this thing not killing her? There's got to be a reason, and then they give you the reason. Also, it looks great. I mean, it's an iconic shot for a reason.
I think it's like it's the first time that you could. I'm trying to remember exactly, but it feels like one of the first times you get like a real. It's the closest you ever get to an alien.
Yeah,
you know, like one of them.
Yeah.
It's just slow
without getting killed.
Steady. Yeah, yeah. And so it's like a person in the shot with the alien, and it's like nothing's happening. You're not sure why. It's an intense like moment in that movie and a great shot.
Yeah.
And I think because there's so many, especially maybe even in the first two movies, like there's a lot of quick cuts or like you see the alien and they quickly cut away or something like that. But this is the first time where it's like very slow, very deliberate. Like it is tight on her face. You see just that fear in the moment type shot. And we've said it already. It's so iconic.
Oh yeah. It's really great.
I did want to say, taking us back to what we were talking about though, getting into the reshoots and that sort of thing. You know, in one of the interviews, they talked to him about that. And I remember the guys like, describe how you felt. And he was like, I was exhausted. And, you know, they told me like, we're going to, you know, put this thing together and see what they think. And, he's like, it was a pretty sobering experience, that whole thing. And, I think the interview was like, we saw like all the stuff that it was like a 7-page long list of reshoots. He's like, no, dude, you saw the wish list of stuff I wanted to shoot.
What I wanted to shoot.
Yeah. And, he said it was like a lot of the work was just trying to figure out what we're going to do with the ending. And, he was like, this is actually probably my most depressing moment, ever in my career. And he said, people say to me, he's like, I've had a couple of people say, you know, they didn't know how they wanted to end Casablanca. And he's like, and I'm always like, yeah, cool. I hope this is Casablanca.
Yeah. Hope it turns out that way. Well, as the footage began to be assembled and the film started, you know, taking shape and it was approaching its final cut, spirits did start to pick up a bit. Weaver really loved what she was seeing. Fox started praising the film. Even Hill and Geiler liked where things were going. Fox was even happy enough with the footage that they kicked in an additional 6 days and a couple more $1 million to shoot one of Fincher's wish list scenes, which was the birth of the baby alien, which in my opinion, it's not as iconic as the shot we were just talking about, but it is one of the more memorable moments in the film to me. I mean, because that alien just looks, the creature that they created for it just looks cool as hell. I think the little small alien with the like membrane over it and everything. It's a great moment. But Fincher, you know, he was never really happy with the final result. The studio had tied an albatross around his neck for the entire shoot. Then they'd cut his feet off before he reached the finish line. Even with renewed support from the studio, when he watched the film, all that Fincher saw were the things that he could have done. You know, it wasn't ever fully his vision. And then at some point during the film's chaotic reshoot and post-production period, David Fincher finally had enough and he left the project, and the completion of the movie was overseen by the studio. So the final edit that went to theaters he was not really involved with. He's like threw his hands up and said, you know what, you guys do this.
It just hit me why he never watched the assembly cut, probably. Is because my wife and I are watching this documentary, The Vow. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen that?
I have,
about
yep.
the sex cult,
mm-hmm.
NXIVM?
Yeah.
There's a part in there where that Keith Raniere guy says the idea of hell is the person you are has to spend time with the person that you could have become.
Yeah. Which sounds...
And I was like... I don't know. I just heard that on an episode, and then you telling the story about what could have been. I'm like, David Fincher's idea of hell is having to watch a double feature of Alien 3 and the movie that Alien 3 could have been.
Yeah, I mean that's a great line. Too, it's unfortunate that it's from Keith Raniere, who is an enormous piece of shit.
Right.
And then James Lipton comes in and asks him questions about
it. James Lipton Keith Raniere interview would have been interesting.
But James Lipton would have fucked him at the end. Because you don't spend 20 minutes with that guy without him getting inside that head and other parts.
Head and holes.
Yeah.
So the studio ends up overseeing the cut of Alien 3, and they decided to cut the footage down to an even shorter length so that it could be screened more times each day. I mean, that's not an unusual thing for a studio to do. More times a movie plays during a day in a movie theater, the more people have a chance to go see it, the more tickets they're going to sell. So that's their thinking on that. Originally scheduled for a summer 1991 release. After all of this, thanks to all of this ongoing behind-the-scenes strife, Alien 3's release date was initially put off until Christmas of that year, then later rescheduled for Memorial Day weekend. So we're talking, it's like coming out a year later than they had anticipated. Memorial Day weekend, 1992. It's finally released May 22nd of that year. Comes in number 2 at the box office, just behind another sequel, Lethal Weapon 3. And by the end of its run, it grossed $159 million worldwide, but only $55 million of that was made domestically. It did much better overseas than it did here, and it was generally considered a box office disappointment. And critical reviews were mixed, especially since it was inevitably being compared to the previous 2 entries, something that all sequels kind of have to go through. One major critic of the film's story was James Cameron, who called the decision to kill off Bishop Newton Hicks a slap in the face to both him and fans of the original film, and of his film, of course. Michael Biehn, after he learned that Hicks had been killed off, he demanded and received almost as much money for the use of his photograph, which is on screen for like 3 seconds, in a single scene. He was given just almost as much money for that as he'd been paid for his entire role in Aliens, because he wasn't paid very well for Aliens, we should say. So I guess at least things worked out for him. But the funniest thing is, when you know that little bit of trivia and then you watch the movie and you see his photo in that scene, you're like, it's so distorted because it's like digitized. You can't even tell that it's him. Like, it could have been anybody. They could have used anyone's photograph, but instead they paid Michael Biehn for however much he got paid in Aliens for that one little moment. So, hey, you know what? That silver lining for him, at least, I guess.
I was going to say, good for that guy.
Yeah,
whatever.
That's right. Good for him. Didn't even have to work for it.
I mentioned to you guys, like, in another chat together outside of this podcast, but, like, you're talking about the money. Ridley Scott visited production of Alien 3. There was a story about Fincher talking to him, and he was like thrilled that like Ridley Scott had stopped by. And he talked to him and Sigourney and was like, "How's it going?" And they were like, "It's tough,
not great.
The money's not great, and there's not stuff's not going well." And he said they said like Ridley Scott was like, "Yeah, this is no way to make a movie." It was like, I think he told Fincher, he was like, "Remember to make some small stuff in between the big stuff," or something like that. Yeah. And he's like, "I'm still waiting to get paid for Alien." So,
well, Sir Ridley's doing okay. Although that Gladiator sequel he's working on right now, its budget, I just read an article yesterday, has like doubled to, I think it's like over $300 million right now.
Perfect.
Yeah. So he's not going to make much money off that one either, probably. So, but among Alien 3's cast and crew, as we've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but David Fincher definitely had his defenders. Like, the cast and crew were pretty much always on his side. Actors Charles Dance and Ralph Brown, editor Terry Rawlings, who I don't think we've mentioned, but Terry Rawlings also was the editor on Ridley Scott's Alien. So Charles Dance, Ralph Brown, Terry Rawlings, even would-be director Vincent Ward, they all came to Fincher's defense when the movie came out, saying that many of the film's problems were caused by excessive studio interference. But Alien 3 has a weird, let's call it an epilogue to its story, I guess, because it's kind of received a second life in the last couple of decades. In late 2003, the film was released as part of the Alien Quadrilogy DVD box set, which I own. Did you have that one, Gary?
I do.
Yeah.
I've got it too.
Yeah, the Alien Quadrilogy DVD box set. It featured both the theatrical cut and a new alternate cut of each of the 4 films in the series. So this is the original 4 Alien films. And notably, David Fincher was the only director that refused to be involved in this DVD box set. So the special edition cut of Alien 3 was created without his input. It was instead put together by Charles de Lazurka, who was the producer of the DVD set. And this was all kind of inspired by James Cameron, who had already released a special edition It was his director's cut, but he called it Special Edition of Aliens. So that's kind of where they got the idea. They're like, well, James Cameron's already done this. Let's get all the other directors to do it and release this box set where there's 2 versions of every film. So that's kind of where that was kind of the genesis of all of this. And Ridley Scott came along, Jean-Pierre Jeunet came along, but David Fincher said, absolutely not going to do it. So they put it together without him. And this special edition cut, which is also known as the assembly cut, it's a significantly different film than the theatrical cut of the movie. But what it is not is a director's cut, because not only was Fincher not involved with it, but it would be nearly impossible to create a true director's cut of the film since Fincher was unable to shoot all of the footage that he wanted for the movie. So it's kind of hard to do a director's cut when the footage isn't there. The cut that was assembled by Charles A. Lauzirika was based on an early lost cut that had been found in storage at 20th Century Fox. And this cut had been prepared by Fincher and Terry Rawlings, and it was dated before the film was extensively reworked by the studio. So it's as close to Fincher's vision as we could probably get.
But it's more like it's what Fincher was able to, what his best vision, it seems like it was his best view of what he had.
But using the material that he had. Yeah, it's what he was able to build out of what he had, but he didn't have all the parts he needed to really build what he was trying to make.
Exactly, yeah. Because I always think of like director's cuts being like, oh, these are going to be longer or something, because it's just like all the shit that the studio cut out is put back in.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Or you remember when that Daredevil, that, I don't know why this is the go-to reference, but the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, when it came out, there was a director's cut of Daredevil.
Yeah.
And it was like, there was like literally whole storylines in there, or like plot points, through lines that were not in the other movie.
Yeah.
It was just insane. But anyway, but yeah, to your point, not a director's cut, because it's just him assembling what he could.
Right, exactly. And this cut, it not only lengthens the movie by adding a lot of new material, but it also rearranges some sequences, and it removes a good amount of footage that is found in the theatrical release. Mostly, I imagine a lot of the footage that's not in it is stuff that he was compromised on, or that the studio forced him to do, or forced him to put in, things like that. One of the biggest alterations is the inclusion of an entire subplot where Ripley and the prisoner succeed in trapping the alien, and the inmate Gallic, who is played by Paul McGann, who just kind of disappears in the theatrical cut, but he becomes an almost a secondary antagonist for a few minutes in this version. Like, he just starts murdering people,
Yep.
And another big change is the host that the alien gestates in. And the theatrical cut, the alien host is Spike, which is a Rottweiler that's like a pet of one of the prisoners, it seems like. But in the assembly cut, the alien instead emerges from an ox, because they've got all these oxes to help. They're like work horses, essentially, work oxes that we see. We see them early on when they're pulling the spaceship out that has crash landed. But that ox is a much cooler thing for the alien to gestate in, I think. I have no idea why they changed it to a dog. I don't know why they would do that. I couldn't find anything that mentioned why they made that decision, but that's a pretty big change.
It is really weird in there. Like, I had that same thought, was like, why did they do this? Because
yeah,
I actually think the part where it comes out of the ox is pretty cool. Like, it's not a bad scene.
No, it's great.
So, I don't know. That would confuse me. Like, why did that matter to the?
Like, why did it need to be a dog? Why? I don't understand it.
I guess maybe the dog is there in the earlier scenes, so they're just like, something's got to happen to this dog.
Yeah.
I don't know what.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't understand the logic behind that one. And I mean, there are way too many changes for us to go into all of them in detail. If you want a list of them, you can go on that, what's it called? Xenopedia, the wiki for the Alien franchise. You can find a list of every change made in this if you want to. But overall, this version of the film puts a much bigger focus on the religious beliefs of the inmates, and several of the characters, like Gallic, are fleshed out significantly. You get a lot more time with all of the prisoners in this version, which I think is important, because then you care a little bit more about that when they get killed. I mean, one of the great things about Alien and Aliens is all the side characters, not just Ripley, but all the other characters. Like, you get to know their personalities a little bit more. And I don't think the assembly cut fully does that as well as Alien and Aliens does, but I think it does a much better job than the theatrical cut.
Yeah, the Gallic stuff is really. I was down with the Gallic stuff for him having a more important role.
Yeah, I think it's really good. Yeah.
That supposedly was from a test screening, right? Like I think I read that like they'd done like a test screening and gosh, I think it was Fincher who actually said they were like, well, what happened with the Gallic stuff or something? And he said, what happened was the test screening. It was like a bunch of 18-year-old kids in Long Beach decided they weren't interested in him. And so the studio didn't want him in there anymore. Something like that. It was like,
yeah, it's really dumb. Like, yeah, I saw a similar quote from him where he's like, yeah, they screened it in like Long Beach and a bunch of teenagers were complaining about there being a bunch of bald British guys in this film. And it's like, well, maybe you're talking to the wrong demographic. I don't know.
Right. But yeah, Gallic, to his credit, does have that one line about, and I think it's pulled from somewhere else, but in an insane world, a sane man must appear insane.
Yeah, I don't think he originated that quote, but it does fit his character, especially in that moment. Yeah. Now, it should be noted that although the assembly cut isn't Fincher's exact vision for the film, and he claims to have never seen it, so we have to take his word on that, I guess, it definitely hews closer to what he wanted from the film than the theatrical release did. And when it was released in 2003, it received significantly more positive reviews than the theatrical release had, and many critics and fans alike have reevaluated the film in the years since. While most people would still rank this below Scott and Cameron's films, the general consensus is that the assembly cut is vastly superior to the theatrical cut, and that's something I would agree with personally. Now, you guys are, I know you guys have both seen Alien 3 before this. Had you both seen the assembly cut before?
I had. I mean, as I mentioned, I have that box set, and I tend to lean more towards director's cuts or special editions, or in this case, the assembly cut, just because I feel like that ends up having more of the true vision.
Yeah.
Rather than something that was cut down to get the ticket sales up.
Sure.
So I tend to go to those anyway. So, you know, if you ask me like how Alien 3 ends, it ends with Ripley kind of holding her arms out and, you know, peacefully falling backwards.
Doing the crucifix pose, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's how Alien 3 ends for me.
Yeah, so you were familiar with it. How about you, Gary?
Yeah, I was familiar with it too. I actually watched all the Alien movies before all I think the last time we hit on James Cameron, I ended up just watching them all the way through again. And like Todd, I think I just, for whatever reason, was just like, well, I choose this other version. So
yeah. I mean,
that's the version I know.
Yeah, I rewatched 1 and 2 before watching 3 this time, just to have them fresher in my mind, you know. Plus, I love them, so I'll watch them anytime. But Alien 3, to be honest, I think Alien 3 kind of gets a bad rap, or rather, I think its reputation as a huge, critically reviled flop is a little bit exaggerated. For one, it wasn't a huge flop. I mean, it made $159 million worldwide. That's just shy of the 183 that Cameron's film made. Now, granted, Aliens cost about $18 million, and Alien 3's budget was triple that, but it wasn't a disaster. It was a disappointment, for sure, but it wasn't a disaster. It didn't lose money, you know? And it wasn't reviled by critics. I feel like the way that people talk about Alien 3, you'd think that it was like, you look it up on Rotten Tomatoes and it's at like 3%. You know, it wasn't reviled by critics. As I mentioned, it received mixed reviews, with a lot of critics feeling that it was a movie that was heavily flawed, but not without merit. Roger Ebert, in his review, he called it the best looking bad movie I've ever seen, which I think is a pretty good summation of the critical reception at the time. And I think a big part of the film's reputation as some sort of disaster actually stems from comments by Fincher himself, who, you know, has essentially disowned the movie. And, you know, there's one quote from him in 2009. It might have been with like The Guardian, where he said, "A lot of people hated Alien 3, but no one hated it more than I did." Now, that makes it really easy for people to latch on and say Alien 3 sucks. Alien 3 is the worst. Like even David Fincher, the guy who directed it, hates it, but he could have been talking about his experience making the movie, not the final product. I mean, he does dislike it because it and he does disown it, and he talks about it a lot. When he talks about Alien 3, he does not talk about it kindly, I guess I should say. And of course, the film's production troubles, they were all over the press at the time. And those have certainly factored into the film's legacy, because it is hard to talk about Alien 3 without thinking of all the trouble that it went through while being filmed. And we're probably not helping matters here by talking about it for 2 hours on a podcast, so we're adding to that conversation. But I think if you put the stories of the production away, and you put away the sky high expectations from fans and from the studio, and just look at the movie as a movie, it does have a lot to offer. It is heavily flawed, and no matter which version you're looking at. But just like Ebert said, I think it's an incredible looking movie. Like, the cinematography is great, and the production design, which I don't think we've mentioned him, but the production designer on this is a legendary production designer named Norman Reynolds. It's incredible. The movie, the sets look great. It's awesome. Every set is just dripping in menace. It's claustrophobic, as it should be. Like, it's a great looking movie. I don't think anyone would argue that.
For what it's worth, too, I'd like to say, Elliot Goldenthal's, score here
it's
is
great.
Really good too.
It is. I
like the score of the movie. I think I read he wrote it during the LA riots.
Oh, wow.
And just the fatalistic feeling, the haunting, and I don't know. I think it works really well for this movie.
Well, what do y'all think overall on Alien 3? I would say, what are your thoughts on Alien 3? One, just as a movie, just in general, either version of it, and also like in comparison to Ridley Scott and James Cameron's movies.
I think with Alien 3, I mean, if you watched 1 and 2 and you're invested, same song, third verse. That might actually be a bit dismissive, because looking at it the way we did with Fincher's music videos, of looking at things that are being done stylistically here, juxtaposed with what we know is to come. I feel like looking at the first Alien movie, they're on the ship. And, we get to know that ship pretty well, but again, we're talking, it's very claustrophobic and all of that. And then with Aliens, it's more about the Marines, and it's more of an action movie. I don't think anybody would ever dispute that. But at, those final set pieces, you kind of get lost in the maze of pipes. But this one, looking at, I noticed a lot of upward angles.
Yes.
Like where he had the camera kind of tilted up at the actors.
Yeah, he does it a lot.
And I was like, and I was wondering about that. And I was like, I wonder what that decision was. But I know putting the camera low makes smaller figures seem larger than life. That's sort of a generalization, but like, again, looking at what they were doing in terms of putting something between the subject and the camera, and having these very dirty looking sets where it's very used and very grimy. I felt like it really ground the film in realism to a degree, where it's like, okay, this is a very real location.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
This planet exists. This prison planet exists. And having all those extra details about the religion of these inmates that seems to be cobbled together from a lot of different philosophical points of view, I always found that really interesting. They actually did that in an episode of Star Trek Discovery, where they find this planet of humans, but they've been brought together and they've kind of compiled their own religion.
Yeah, I remember
based on every religion. Yeah. So I think this is really interesting to see that with the sets, and I was drifting off there talking about the religion stuff, but with the sets and this feeling like a real lived in world, I feel like that really does set the stage for stuff with Fight Club, In the House, the Paper Street Soap Company. And the
everything in
stuff.
7, like the entire movie.
Yeah.
I was
But,
literally
you know-
watching it happy that we did the last episode that we did, because I was like, oh yeah, this movie's done by the guy who did Express Yourself.
Yeah. Of course. Well,
I felt like you could really feel that in the sets and stuff. Like, I don't know, something about the way, I don't know.
that that almost steampunky look to it. And Todd, going back to what you're saying about those low angle shot, Fincher likes to shoot up at angles. Like, you see a lot of ceilings in this movie, like shot from below, which is unusual because a lot of sets are not built with ceilings. So that was obviously a very intentional decision that he made. And I think that stems from, David Fincher's a big fan of Orson Welles, and especially a big fan of Citizen Kane. I mean, he made a movie about it, Mank, about the making of Citizen Kane. And if you ever watch Citizen Kane, which you should, because it's literally one of the best movies ever made. So if you haven't seen it, you don't need me to recommend Citizen Kane. But Orson Welles does that a lot in that movie. And part of it in that movie is to show Kane as this mythic figure, larger than life. But he shoots
That's the wrestler?
Yeah, that Kane. Yeah. who is
WWE.
He is mythic and larger than life. But I think Fincher's using it in this to create a sense of claustrophobia. Because by seeing the ceilings in every shot, you kind of get the idea that these guys they're underground, they're stuck there, so that when shit starts going down, there's more tension there, if that makes sense, And also the ceiling, you also know that alien is in the ducts above that ceiling. So every time you see those ceilings, there's the idea that the xenomorph could be somewhere up there. As we see in the mess hall scene where the warden gets plucked up from the ceiling, which is a great moment, by the way. And I love the most relatable thing in this entire movie is in that scene where the alien, comes from the ceiling and grabs the guy. And I think it's Morse who just looks and goes, fuck! Like, that's his reaction. And I was like, dude, that's exactly what I would do. And that's the exact reaction I would have. I wouldn't know what else to do but scream fuck as loud as I could if I saw that. So what do you guys think then? Do you think Alien 3 works? Because a lot of people, this movie has a lot of detractors. How do you think it works? Do you think the assembly cut works better? Do you think the assembly cut is good enough to redeem the movie? Like, where are your thoughts on that?
Yes.
Yes, you think it redeems it? Or yes to which? Sorry. You okay, Todd?
Yeah, that was just funny. It almost killed me. Sorry.
Yes to which question, I guess?
For me, I would say that I agree that it is a little bit unfairly maligned, the film in general. Alien 3 holds a special place in my heart alongside Highlander 2 as the movie that took me into adulthood to actually watch all the way through.
You just kept falling asleep.
Because I kept falling asleep watching them.
Yeah, I get it.
And But I will say, I do think Alien 3 is a little slow. I still stand by that. Mm-hmm. But especially the assembly cut is not a terrible movie. Like, it's not like the worst thing you've ever seen.
No.
In the scheme of Alien movies, it's not even on the bottom half of the list, probably.
Right, yeah.
So it's fine. It's just, I think that I would prefer the assembly cut if I had to choose.
Absolutely.
And I'd stick there because I do feel while it's slow, the assembly cut makes that justifiable with like how much bigger, epic, or something. I don't know. It's not bigger, but it's like more detailed story.
It's like
I don't know,
meatier.
something about it.
It's got more
meat on the bones. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. So I would say the assembly cut's the way to go there because it feels like a pretty complete vision, and it feels like a solid movie that, it's still a little slow, but it is a nice story.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with Gary. And I already gave my love for and my thoughts on assembly cut versus theatrical cut. But if I had to nitpick I guess it was 2002 assembly cut.
2003, yeah.
2002. Yeah. So, and I guess I don't know why I didn't remember that it was this way, but I guess based on the stuff that was available, they put it together, and a lot of the sound isn't great, so they have to use closed caption for some of the stuff. Like there's things where the background noise overpowers some of the dialogue lines, and
where they probably would have done ADR had that been used in the theatrical cut to
right. So if I had a wish list, it would be for a more complete assembly cut. Just with the sound being more refined and all of that stuff, because in watching that, it kind of takes you out of it a little bit. But
I use closed captions on a lot of movies anyway, so it doesn't bother me. I've gotten in the habit of using closed captions on movies because I don't know. Sometimes it gives me a different. Sometimes some dialogue will just especially if it's a movie I've seen a bunch of times, dialogue can just wash over me, Whereas then if I watch it with the captions on, I'm a little more engaged with that dialogue. If it's something,
100%.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was telling Jennifer the other day that I feel that way, especially even with foreign movies, like where she used to be more bothered by it. I think she's coming around with it. That I was like, actually, I think, especially even with horror, like I'm like, it makes me focus on the movie.
Yeah.
And so it's
and
like
actually,
reading a book, you get like drawn into it.
Yeah,
so,
you're actually
I
really like taking in what they're saying instead of like it just being a line of dialogue. Like you're actually like you're forced to engage with the dialogue a little bit more, if that makes sense. Because I've gotten in the habit of doing that all the time anyway, so that doesn't bother me. I don't think that Alien 3 quite deserves its reputation, right? I'd never go so far as to say it's some sort of misunderstood masterpiece. Misunderstood, maybe a little bit. Masterpiece? No way. This is not a masterpiece. It's not at all. The movie is rife with problems from a script standpoint, from an editing standpoint, especially in terms of pacing. Like you said, Gary, it can be a little bit slow, especially the theatrical cut, I think. I think the pacing on the assembly cut is a little bit better, but both of them are a little bit slow, but it works better in the assembly cut. But one of the major problems, and this is just beating a dead horse, I guess, but the decision to kill off Hicks and Newt is insane to me. Like, it's absolutely insane. Because Aliens went to great lengths to create this family unit between Ripley and Hicks and Newt by the end of it. And for this movie to just throw all of that to the wayside is, just like James Cameron said, it's a slap in the face. Not to mention, it's totally unnecessary because there's no reason that you couldn't have a version of the Alien 3 story, even with the prison and everything, that didn't include Hicks and Newt. Like, there's no reason you couldn't have worked them into it, So it's just a really weird decision to me. It's almost like they were just trying to piss off the audience. Like, there are a lot of decisions throughout this movie that seem designed to piss off the audience, like killing Charles Dance's character so early on. Yeah, like that just seems like something that you're just doing to make people mad. But killing Hicks and Newt is honestly kind of unforgivable.
Yeah, I think I see both sides to that, where having Hicks and Newt would definitely make the relationship between that family unit and the population of this island more complicated. Having someone like Charles Dance's character, who I love, it's great, but having him die early, I feel like puts this sense of nobody's safe. Because I mean,
sure, yeah.
Some of those favorite stories is where you get sucked in of like this character who you identify with and you're following their story, and then they die. You're like, oh shit. Like,
and it's right after he like
in this.
confesses his sins to.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, which, as you know, for horror fans, that's either a point of redemption or the point of condemnation of like, okay, well, now you're definitely good. Yeah, exactly. So sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
I think there's a discussion to be had there for sure.
Yeah.
Cameron, for what it's worth, I mean, he never put down Fincher with any of that. Like,
no, he didn't.
He was just like, he gets it that he was like dicked around by the studio and stuff, but that I think in his quote, didn't he say something like, with Newt and Hicks, he's like, I felt like the audience earned something with them.
Yeah.
Or something more, or something like that. He was like, I felt like we earned something more from them, or something weird like that. And I liked that statement, that it was just like, yeah, I get it. I get nobody's safe and anybody can die at any time. But it also, like, I don't know. I feel like it would have been a little bit more to at least let them get killed by the alien, like,
yeah, not just
during the
off
movie or
screen.
something.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that they get killed off screen. You don't even get to give them like a goodbye or anything. Like, sure, if Hicks had been killed by the alien, I think people would have been more okay with that. You know, like if it had happened over the course of the movie as opposed to off screen in between movies. Like that's what's kind of fucked up about it, I think. But I think
that's where I am.
Yeah. I think one thing that makes, this kind of goes back to what you were saying, Todd, but I think one thing that really makes Alien 3 a fascinating watch is what it shows us about David Fincher as a director. Because while this is a compromised vision from him, there are a lot of things here that hint at his later greatness. For one, I'll say it again, it looks incredible. All David Fincher movies look incredible. It's got that dark, grimy aesthetic that will serve him so well in later films, especially in Seven and Fight Club, which we mentioned. But you also start to see some of his themes kind of emerge here, which is honestly impressive considering how compromised the film is, that you can still see these things that are like themes that will continue to pop up in David Fincher movies, you know. Like you've got the structure of Fury, was it Fury 161, I think, the planet. It's filled with all these underground tunnels, which puts Ripley and the prisoners in an environment they can't escape. They're like rats in a maze. And it pits them against the xenomorph in a game of chess. You know, they're trying to outsmart it, basically. With the entire finale of the movie, the entire last act is hinged on them trying to outsmart the creature. And this, of course, is a concept that he repeats over and over, but especially in Panic Room, you know, where people are trapped in the house with these criminals. But throughout his filmography, you'll see Fincher's obsessions emerge. He's fascinated by systems, structures, crime and punishment, patterns, games, and these are all things you see a little bit of these in Alien 3. Now, you made a joke about the rules of the game earlier. The reason I named this series The Rules of the Game, for one, it mimics famous lines from two of Fincher's films. You've got figuring out the object of the game is the object of the game. That's from The Game. And of course, the first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. We all know that one. But rules and games are something that we see pop up over and over again in his movies. You've got the aforementioned chess match between the would-be thieves and Jodie Foster and Kristen Stewart in Panic Room. The game in The Game, of course. The puzzles in Zodiac. I mean, that whole movie is about puzzles. And there's a lot of that DNA already here in Alien 3, I think, despite the fact that it is an imperfect representation of those themes. But also, and maybe most importantly, Alien 3 taught David Fincher how to fight for his vision. You know, which is a lesson that he would use to make some pretty incredible films over the course of the 30 plus years since this movie. He learned that if he wanted to get his true vision on screen, he's got to put his foot down and he's got to fight for it. And he does that. And so I think that had it not been for Alien 3, and honestly, had it not been for what he went through on Alien 3, fighting with the studio, we might not have ever gotten Fight Club or Zodiac or The Social Network. And I think for that alone, Alien 3 deserves a little bit of grace, at least. If not praise, at least a little bit of grace.
I don't think he ever has asked for it, but yeah, I think he deserves it. And I think at the end of the day, as cocky as he's not cocky, but you know, like confident in his abilities,
yeah.
Like you said, his main thought is that back to the other quote that I mentioned where he talked about this is not made for a person that watches the movie one time. We're making movies for people that watch them 5 times or something like that. He cares about the audience. He clearly does care about the audience having a good time. I found this another quote. I'm going to keep quoting the Independent article to death, but 1992. It seemed like he had kind of made peace with what happened, but he said this. He said, quote, "If we failed to do one thing in this film, and we failed to do many things, it was to take people out of their everyday lives. It's not a scary scare movie, but a queasy scare movie. And I think people resent that. Actually, my dentist, as he was drilling my teeth, was giving me his thesis on the things wrong with this film. And he said, when you go out to this movie, you haven't gotten away from AIDS. You haven't gotten away from race riots. You haven't gotten away from the fear of other cultures. We tried to make a movie about now, and I just think in terms of world box office, we may have chosen wrong. You know, if I make 10 shitty movies, I deserve the flack. And if I go on to make 10 great ones, this will probably be looked on as my first bungled masterpiece.
That's pretty good. I love that his dentist is drilling into him and while just shitting on his movie.
Yeah.
Right. But I say that, and there was another one that I don't have the exact quote for, but in one of the interviews I remember he said something about like, you know what? I take all the responsibility because I'll definitely get all the blame.
There's another quote from him that kind of goes hand in hand with that, where he said, and I don't remember exactly where he said this, but he says, some people go to the movies to be reminded that everything's okay. I don't make those kind of movies. So he's not really trying to make movies that are an escape. I mean, Seven is not exactly like a feel-good movie, right?
Right.
Yeah. He doesn't exactly make feel-good movies. The only one, Mank is maybe the outlier in his filmography that's a little more sentimental, but he doesn't make sentimental movies. Like, that's not what he's doing.
Seven's like the ultimate Christmas movie. It's just like, you're always wondering, what's in the box, you know? I'm going to read you something real quick. I want to see what you think about this.
Please do.
Because this person said this, I think it was on like crack.com or something. And it's just fun things you never realized about movies or something like that was what I found in it or something. But after everything we've talked about, I'm curious where everybody lands on this. This person said, Alien 3 is secretly about AIDS in the 80s and early 90s and how badly we fucked up trying to deal with this epidemic. The deaths of Newt and Hicks, as painful as they were, is actually central to this message. The scariest thing about AIDS is that it seems to kill almost randomly. It doesn't matter if you're an innocent like Newt or a fit and healthy young man like Hicks. You might start showing symptoms and quickly die before anybody knows what's going on. Then there's the population of Fury 161. It's almost completely abandoned prison planet. One of the higher-ups realizes they can potentially wrangle this little alien problem into profit. So they show up dressed in hazmat suits, which is what some doctors chose to wear when they treated AIDS patients. But most telling is the speech given by the character Dylan, who explains his decision to try and kill the monster that's killing them. He says, quote, "You're all going to die. The only question is how you check out. Do you want to go out on your feet or on your fucking knees begging? I ain't much for begging. Nobody ever gave me nothing. So I say, fuck that thing. Let's fight it." It's badass. Strikes the exact same tone as Larry Kramer's speech from when he launched Act Up in New York in 1987, 5 years before Alien 3 was released. He said, quote, "If my speech tonight doesn't scare the shit out of you, we're in real trouble. If what you're hearing doesn't rouse you to anger, fury, rage, and action, gay men will have no future here on Earth. How long does it take before you get angry and you fight back?" It says, Alien 3 is not a great movie, but it's ironic that everyone's biggest criticism is that the death of Newt and Hicks was senseless and made them feel betrayed, when that reaction was precisely the point. It's a horror movie after all.
I think that person's well-intentioned, but I think they are reaching with that analogy. Because I don't think that was the intention of David Fincher or anyone else involved in the making of this, because, and you could probably back me up on this, Gary, because we've done a lot of research for this episode. And have you found a single interview with anyone involved in the making of this movie where they mentioned that they were making this as an AIDS metaphor? It makes it
right up until the dentist apparently told him it didn't make him forget about AIDS.
Right. Yeah. So, that's it. That's it. Yeah. So I think, people can read into a movie however they want, but I do not think that was the intention of any of the filmmakers. Although that does bring up, someone we haven't talked about hardly at all in this episode other than mentioning him, that's Charles S. Dutton, and how he's great in this movie, isn't he?
Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah. He's really great. And that speech is great. That's his Bill Pullman Independence Day speech is what that is. Rallying the troops, it's a great moment, but he's really fantastic in this movie. And I'm sorry that we didn't talk about him enough during this episode, but there was a lot of other shit.
In a perfect world, you get all the cool characters from the Alien films that could like bounce back.
Yeah.
And, you know, like Ripley is clearly the coolest character for one, but then you get like added on like Bishop Newton Hicks.
Yeah.
Newt's not that cool, but
No, Newt's not very cool.
It's fine.
She could have been, though. If she'd been allowed to live, she could have grown to be cool.
She could have turned out awesome. She could have been a better version of Carl from The Walking Dead or something,
Yeah.
you know. Like, and then you would have got Dutton here. He would have come back and
then
you know.
maybe Ron Perlman from the next one or something.
It would 100% been Ron Perlman. But
If you're going to pick the coolest person from any movie and Ron Perlman is in that movie, he's going to win that battle.
right, exactly. You get like the ultimate xenomorph killing thing. Justin,
like
before
the Avengers of alien movies.
right, and then you get that chick from Alien versus Predator, the one that buddy cops up with Predator.
Nice.
What was I going to say? Oh, before we wrap this thing too, we should mention that you dropped some knowledge on us the other day for people that don't know. 3 alien movies into this thing. The xenomorph is what we refer to the alien as, but that just means alien.
Yeah.
Or like, it just means weird creature.
It's not the official, like, it's not a species, which I didn't realize until I started looking into this. I just assumed that was like, I don't know, the Latin name for whatever this species of alien is, but no, it just means alien. Although they do refer to it. I mean, even when, in this movie, when when Ripley is having, 85 message the rescue, or message the company, I guess it is, he says, "What do I call it?" And she says xenomorph, because then there's the joke where she has to tell him how to, or he doesn't know how to spell it, you know, because he's dumb.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting bit of trivia that I did not know, even though I've watched all of these movies so many times. I just always assumed.
Supposedly, he was also, just based on the entries, he was not supposed to be dumb. He was supposed to be just a guy who was really desperate to get back home to his family, and like he was supposed to be like kind of a rival for Ripley on like the process.
There's that whole thing where they talk about like he's called 85 because he's got a low IQ. Like that's the
no. I'm saying like in the original script he read,
gotcha.
apparently he was not. That was not the case. That's just how he slowly was changed. He says somewhat by Sigourney Weaver. She specifically said she did not like him she did not believe he should be a rival for her.
Yeah, this is Ripley's show. I mean, I guess she didn't have a problem with Hicks, though, in the previous movie.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe she just liked Michael Biehn more. I mean, he is a little more badass.
He's dreamy.
He's a little dreamier. Man. So, well, the whole Alien 3 debacle led David Fincher to question whether he ever wanted to even make another movie. Like, that's how bad his experience was on this. This dream that he had had since childhood, the only thing that he ever wanted to do, which was to make movies, was nearly destroyed by the greedy, creatively inept executives at 20th Century Fox. So for a while after this movie, David Fincher retreated back to music videos and commercials, but before long, he got the itch to go back on a film set. And the next film that he would create would be the true breakout film for the director, the one that would not only put him on the map, but would pair him with two of his frequent future collaborators, leading man Brad Pitt and screenwriter Andrew Kevin Walker. And that film is, of course, we've already name dropped it several times during this episode.
Maybe 7 times?
Maybe 7 times.
There it is.
That movie is, of course, Seven. But that's it for this week. We'll return with 7 in a couple of weeks on our next episode. Do you guys have anything else to add, or do you guys want to let our listeners know where you can be found on the internet?
I am at This Is Gary Horn, and you can follow me there. I don't know what else I was going to say about that. That's it.
All right, excellent.
My show, Computer Resume Podcast, is available wherever you get your podcasts. We are covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old. Right now, we are hip deep in our coverage of Strange New Worlds, and we've got some very exciting guests coming soon. You can find us at Computer Resume on Facebook, X, Instagram, Venmo, and Patreon. And I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, X, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
I am at Justin_Bishop. You can find me on Instagram and Letterboxd there. The show is at cinema_shock. That's also Instagram, X, Threads, Letterboxd, all that shit, Facebook. All of those things, all the things. Check out all of our episodes as well as links to our Discord, and our merch at cinemashock.net. As always, if you enjoy the show, rate, review, and share us with anyone you know in any way that you know how. And until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
When they first heard about the keys, it was crew expendable. The next time they sent in Marines, they were expendable too. What makes you think they're going to care about a bunch of lifers who found Johnny at the ass end of space? You really think they're going to let you interfere with their plans for the keys? They think we're crud. And they don't give a fuck about one friend of yours that's died. Not one.
Well done, Todd.
Thank you.
At least that was from the movie this time.